This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I moved to Millbrook about 8 months ago. It seemed like the perfect place to start over after my divorce. Small town, friendly people, affordable housing. At least that's what the realtor said. The house I bought was this beautiful Victorian with a wraparound porch, bay windows, and tons of character. The kind of place I'd always dreamed of owning. It needed some work, but nothing major. Just cosmetic stuff, you know. I thought I'd gotten such a good deal. The first weird thing I noticed was the neighbors across the street, the Bakers, an elderly couple, probably in their 70s. They were always at their window, just watching. Not in a normal neighborly way where they'd wave or smile. They'd just stare, completely still, their faces blank. I tried waving a few times when I first moved in, but they never responded, just kept staring with those unblinking eyes. I brushed it off at first. They're old, I thought. Maybe they're just curious about the new neighbor. But it kept happening. Every time I'd come home from work or step onto my porch, there they'd be, watching. The first night in the house, everything seemed fine. I was excited about unpacking and making the place my own. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, surrounded by boxes, when, at exactly midnight, I was jolted awake by loud knocking at my front door. 3 distinct knocks, firm and deliberate. I was confused, obviously. Who would be visiting at midnight? I figured maybe it was a neighbor with an emergency or something. When I opened the door, no one was there. The porch was empty, the street was quiet. I checked both sides of the house, thinking maybe some kids were playing a prank, but there was nothing. The next night, same thing. Midnight, 3 knocks. No one there. This continued for about a week. I started getting paranoid, so I set up my phone to record the porch. The knocking happened again, but when I checked the footage the next morning, there was nothing. Just an empty porch and the sound of knocking coming from nowhere. After about 10 days, I stopped answering the door. What was the point? No one was ever there. But then things escalated. The knocking continued, but now at exactly 1 in the morning, I'd hear whispering outside my bedroom window. Not loud enough to make out words, but definitely human voices. Multiple voices, like a group of people having a hushed conversation right outside my window. But again, when I'd look, no one was there. I started losing sleep. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the knocking and the whispers. I tried sleeping with earplugs, playing white noise, even taking sleeping pills. But somehow, I would always wake up at exactly midnight and 1 a.m. when the sound started. After about 3 weeks of this, I decided to talk to the Bakers. Maybe they had seen something or knew something about the house's history. I mean, they were always watching, right? So one Saturday morning I walked across the street and knocked on their door. Mrs. Baker answered, opening the door just enough to see me, not inviting me in. "Hi, I'm your new neighbor from across the street," I said, trying to sound friendly. "I've been having some strange experiences at night and wondered if you might know anything about the house or if you've noticed anyone hanging around." Her face changed when I mentioned the house. Her eyes widened slightly, and her mouth tightened into a thin line. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't belong in that house." Then she shut the door in my face. Just like that. I stood there stunned for a minute. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I didn't belong there. I owned the place. I tried knocking again, but they didn't answer. Through the window, I could see them both just standing there, staring at me. That night, the knocking was more insistent, louder, faster, like someone was desperate to get in. I put pillows over my head and tried to ignore it. The whispering at 1 a.m. seemed louder too, more urgent, though I still couldn't make out the words. The next morning, I found small, muddy footprints on my porch, like a child's footprints, but there hadn't been any rain for weeks. Where did the mud come from? I followed the prints to see where they led, but they just stopped abruptly at the edge of the porch, as if whoever made them had simply vanished into thin air. I called the police that day. The officer who came seemed skeptical but took a report and looked around. He found nothing suspicious, no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been on my property besides the footprints, which he suggested might be my own, that I hadn't noticed before. He basically implied I was being paranoid. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. A few nights later, something changed. At midnight, there was no knocking. I actually got out of bed, confused by the silence. Had it finally stopped? I was almost disappointed, like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But then at 1 a.m., instead of whispers outside my window, I heard something worse, creaking floorboards inside my house, coming from upstairs, from the attic. I froze in bed, my heart racing. I knew I was alone in the house. I'd locked all the doors and windows before going to bed. I'd been doing that religiously since the knocking started. The creaking continued, slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the attic floor. I debated what to do. Call the police again? They already thought I was crazy. Run out of the house? What if someone was waiting for me? I grabbed my phone and a heavy flashlight from my nightstand, something I could use as a weapon if needed, and decided to investigate. The pull-down attic stairs were in the hallway. As I approached them, the creaking stopped. Complete silence. I stood there for what felt like forever, listening. My flashlight gripped so tightly, my knuckles were white. Finally, I pulled down the stairs, half expecting someone to come lunging down at me. Nothing happened, just more silence. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight. The attic was dark and musty, filled with old furniture left by previous owners that I hadn't bothered to clear out yet. I swept my flashlight around, the beam cutting through thick dust particles floating in the air. At first I didn't see anything unusual, just the expected junk, old chairs, boxes, trunks. Then my light fell on the far corner. There was a makeshift bed there, just blankets arranged on the floor in a nest-like formation. Next to it was a small pile of apple cores and what looked like bread crusts. And on the wall above the blankets, written in what looked like charcoal, was a single word: leave. I nearly fell down the attic stairs in my rush to get out. I ran straight out of the house in my pajamas, not even bothering to grab my keys or wallet. I ran across the street to the baker's house and pounded on their door, not caring that it was the middle of the night. This time Mr. Baker answered, fully dressed despite the hour, as if he'd been expecting me. "Someone's been living in my attic," I gasped. "Please call the police." Mr. Baker just stared at me with those same unblinking eyes. "We told you not to come here," he said, his voice flat. "What? What are you talking about? There's someone in my house," I was nearly shouting. Mrs. Baker appeared behind him. "The house has a way of keeping people," she said. "It doesn't let them leave." "What the hell does that mean?" I demanded. "It means," Mr. Baker continued, "that once you move in, the house decides if you belong, and if it doesn't like you, it finds ways to make sure you don't stay." "That's insane," I said. "It's a house. It's just a building." They both just stared at me. Then Mrs. Baker said, "That's what the last 5 owners thought too. None of them stayed more than a few months." "Why didn't anyone tell me this before I bought the place?" I asked. "Would you have believed us?" Mr. Baker replied. I left that night. I got in my car, which thankfully had a spare key hidden in the wheel well, and I drove to a motel several towns over. I never went back to the house except once, during daylight, with a police escort, to grab essential belongings. I left most of my stuff behind. It wasn't worth it. I hired someone to sell the house. Took a massive financial hit, but I didn't care. The new owners moved in last month, young couple with a toddler. I thought about warning them, but what would I say? "Your house doesn't like some people? There might be someone living in your attic?" They'd think I was crazy. I live in an apartment now, 3 hours away. Sometimes, right at midnight, I still think I hear knocking at my door. And sometimes I wonder if the house is still watching me, waiting for me to come back. I don't know what was in that house or why it wanted me gone. All I know is that I still check my attic regularly, and I never ever answer the door at midnight. Story 2. I've never told anyone the full story of what happened last New Year's Eve. I'm still not sure if I should be writing this down, but I need to get it off my chest before tonight. Maybe someone here has gone through something similar or can tell me what to do. I'm desperate. Last year, I was in a pretty dark place. My girlfriend of 5 years had left me in October. My job at the accounting firm was grinding me down, and I'd lost touch with most of my friends. I was living in this small 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Ridgemont. Not a bad place, just empty. I didn't even bother putting up Christmas decorations. When New Year's Eve rolled around, I decided to just stay home. Everyone I knew was either at parties or with family, and I couldn't stomach the thought of forcing small talk at some bar while pretending to be excited about another year. So I ordered Chinese food, grabbed a 6-pack from the fridge, and settled in to watch whatever marathon was playing on TV. Around 9:30, my phone buzzed. I figured it was my mom checking in, but the message was from a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Lucas. Looking forward to our game tonight." I stared at it for a minute, thinking it was a wrong number or maybe some kind of promotional thing for a mobile game. I typed back, "Sorry, I think you have the wrong person." The response came immediately. "No mistake, Lucas Anderson. I know exactly who you are." A chill ran up my spine. I sat up straighter, suddenly very aware of how quiet my apartment was. "Who is this?" I texted back. "A friend, someone who's been watching you. That blue sweater looks comfortable." I froze. I was wearing a blue sweater my mom had given me for Christmas. I jumped up from the couch and went to the windows, pulling the blinds shut. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, but the parking lot lights were bright enough that someone could definitely see in if the blinds were open. "What do you want?" I typed with shaking fingers. "To play a game. You're all alone on New Year's Eve. Sad, isn't it? Let's make it interesting." I was about to call the police when another message came through. It was a photo of me, clearly taken through my living room window from earlier that evening. I was sitting on my couch staring at my laptop. The timestamp on the photo was from just 2 hours ago. My heart was hammering now. I checked all the locks on my doors and windows, then pulled the curtains tight. "I'm calling the police," I wrote back. "Go ahead. I'll be gone before they arrive, and I'll be back when they leave. Wouldn't you rather play my game? It's simple. If you win, I leave you alone. If you lose, well, I'm coming inside." I tried to block the number, but seconds later, a message came from a different one. "Blocking me won't work, Lucas. I have plenty of phones." I stood in the middle of my living room, trying to think. My hands were sweating so much I could barely hold my phone. Part of me still thought this might be some sick prank, maybe from someone at work who knew I lived alone. But that photo... "What's this game?" I finally replied. "I've hidden a key somewhere in your apartment. You have 10 minutes to find it. If you do, you get to see what it unlocks. If you don't, I'm coming in anyway." "How did you get a key into my apartment?" I demanded. "I've been in your apartment many times, Lucas. While you sleep, while you shower, while you're at work. 10 minutes starts now." I felt sick. The thought of someone being in my space, touching my things, watching me sleep, it made me want to vomit. But I started searching. I tore through drawers, looked under furniture, checked all my kitchen cabinets. 7 minutes in, I was getting frantic. There was no key. Maybe this was just some sick mind game. Then I went into the bathroom and noticed something glinting in the sink drain. I reached in and pulled out a small brass key, old and tarnished. It looked antique. "I found it," I texted, my hand still shaking. "Good. Now look for what it unlocks. You have 5 more minutes." I ran around my apartment, trying the key in every lock I could find. It didn't fit any doors or windows. Then I remembered the old wooden box my grandfather had left me when he died. I kept it on the top shelf of my closet because it had always been locked, and I'd never found the key. When I tried the brass key in that box, it clicked open. Inside was a hunting knife with a bone handle and a rubber clown mask. I nearly dropped the box. These items, They were identical to ones my grandfather had owned. He was a hunter and kept his knives in a gun safe. And the mask, he used to wear it to scare me as a kid on Halloween. But his house had been cleared out years ago after he died. These couldn't be the same items. Another text. You found them. Good. I was shaking, uncontrollably now. Who are you? What do you want from me? I want to see if you deserve to live, Lucas. Your grandfather played this game with me once. Now it's your turn. That's when I realized, whoever this person was, they were already inside my apartment. The thought hit me like a truck. I hadn't heard anyone come in, but my apartment wasn't that big. There weren't many places to hide. The bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen, the living room, and a small storage room off the kitchen that I used for extra supplies and my washer-dryer. I grabbed the knife from the box and held it tightly. Where are you? I texted, trying to buy time while I thought. Closer than you think. The game isn't over yet. I needed a plan. My eyes darted around the apartment until they landed on the half-empty bottle of whiskey on my counter. I grabbed it along with my portable radio and quietly made my way to the storage room. I turned the radio on, loud, and spilled some whiskey on the floor, making it look like I'd been drinking in there. Then I crept back out, leaving the door slightly ajar. I hid behind the kitchen counter, clutching the knife, and waited. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, I heard soft footsteps moving toward the storage room. I peeked around the counter and saw a tall figure in dark clothing, their back to me, pushing open the storage room door. The moment they stepped inside, I sprinted across the kitchen and slammed the door shut, turning the deadbolt I'd installed when I first moved in. The person immediately started banging on the door, and I heard laughter, a horrible, familiar laugh that I couldn't quite place. You think this will hold me, Lucas? You're smarter than I thought, but not smart enough. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. The storage room had a small window, but it was barred from the outside for security. There was no way out except through the door. I grabbed my phone and ran to the front door, but then I stopped. What if this person wasn't alone? What if someone was waiting outside? I couldn't take that chance. I looked at the knife in my hand, then at the storage room door that was now being kicked repeatedly from the inside. I made a split-second decision that still haunts me. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the bottle of cooking oil, and poured it all over the floor in front of the storage room. Then I took the lighter I used for candles and set the oil on fire. The flames spread quickly, catching on the rug and then the wooden door. I heard screaming from inside the storage room, but it quickly turned into that same terrible laughter. You're more like him than I thought, Lucas. This is exactly what he did. I didn't understand what he meant, but I couldn't stay any longer. The fire was spreading fast. I grabbed my phone and my wallet and ran out of the apartment, pounding on neighbors' doors as I went. Someone called 911, and within minutes the entire building was being evacuated as smoke filled the hallways. I stood outside in the cold, watching my apartment burn, convinced I'd just killed someone but feeling oddly numb about it. The police and firefighters arrived, and I told them someone had broken in and attacked me, that there was a struggle and somehow a fire started. I didn't mention the texts or the game. I was too scared, and it sounded insane even to me. As the firefighters worked to control the blaze, my phone buzzed one last time. Another unknown number. Congratulations, you bought yourself another year. See you in 365 days. I dropped my phone like it was on fire. When the police recovered it later, there were no messages from any unknown numbers. They were all gone. The firefighters never found a body in my apartment. They said the storage room was completely destroyed, but there was no one inside. Somehow, whoever it was had escaped. I moved 3 states away after that, changed my phone number, deleted all my social media. I even started going by my middle name, James. I told no one where I was going except my mom and made her promise not to tell anyone. For months, I've been looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. The police in my new town know something happened, but I didn't tell them the whole story. Just that I had a stalker in my old city, and now it's New Year's Eve again. In exactly 3 hours, it will have been exactly 1 year since that night. I've barely slept for days. My new apartment is on the 5th floor with reinforced locks and a security system. I've bought a gun. I've covered every window. But 10 minutes ago, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ready for round 2. Story 3. I've been a trucker for over 20 years. I've seen pretty much everything you can imagine on America's highways. Accidents, weird cargo, strange people, you name it. But what happened to me last October on Route 13 in Missouri? I still can't explain it. I've only told a few close friends, but I need to get this off my chest, so here goes. I was doing a standard haul from Chicago to Dallas. Nothing special, just a trailer full of canned goods. Good money, straightforward route. I'd done similar runs dozens of times before. I remember it was a Wednesday night, and I was making good time. The weather had been clear most of the way, and I was hoping to make it to my usual stop in Oklahoma before turning in for the night. Around 9 in the evening, I made the decision to cut through on Route 13 in Missouri. It's not the main route most truckers take, but it can save you some time if you're trying to avoid traffic around Springfield. Plus, I was familiar enough with it to feel comfortable driving it at night. The road was practically empty, just a few cars passing in the opposite direction every now and then. The kind of peaceful driving I actually enjoy. I had the radio on, some classic rock station that was coming in clear. I remember Radar Love was playing, and I was tapping my fingers on the steering wheel, sipping my coffee, just cruising along. The moon was bright that night, almost full, and it lit up the fields on either side of the highway. Everything was normal, completely normal, until it wasn't. I came around this bend in the road and suddenly, in the span of maybe 3 seconds, this fog rolled in. And when I say fog, I don't mean a light mist or something you can just drive through with your fog lights. This was like hitting a wall of thick white soup. It didn't gradually get denser, it was just there, all at once. I immediately slowed down from 65 to about 30, then 20, trying to see the road ahead of me. The first thing I noticed was how the fog seemed to swallow my headlights. They barely penetrated more than 15 feet in front of me. The second thing was the color. It wasn't the typical grayish-white you'd expect. It had this faint yellowish tinge to it that made everything look sickly. And there was something else about it that I couldn't put my finger on right away. It seemed to move in a way that fog shouldn't, almost like it was, I don't know, breathing? I reached for the radio to see if there were any weather alerts, but as soon as the fog hit, the station dissolved into static. I tried scanning through channels, but there was nothing but harsh white noise on every frequency. Even my CB radio was dead, just static and occasional bursts of what sounded like distant, garbled voices that I couldn't make out. Then my engine stuttered, just for a second, but enough to make my heart jump into my throat. Anyone who drives for a living knows that feeling, when your rig hiccups and your first thought is, please God, not here, not now. Thankfully, it kept running, but it didn't sound right. There was a slight knock that hadn't been there before, like something was slightly off in the timing. I checked my GPS, but the screen was glitching, showing my position jumping around, sometimes off the road entirely. My phone showed no service. I was effectively cut off. I kept driving slowly, white-knuckling the steering wheel, trying to follow the center line. The fog was so thick that I couldn't even see the guardrails on the side of the road most of the time. I must have been crawling along like that for about 10 minutes, though it felt much longer. My eyes were starting to hurt from the strain of trying to see through that unnatural haze. That's when I saw him. At first, it was just a dark shape on the right side of the road, maybe 100 feet ahead. As I got closer, I could make out that it was a person walking along the shoulder, heading in the same direction I was driving. A man in what looked like an old leather jacket. My first thought was that some poor guy's car had broken down and he was trying to walk to the nearest town for help. I slowed down even more as I approached him. He didn't turn around or acknowledge my truck, just kept walking steadily. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of him and put on my hazards, thinking I'd offer him a ride to the next town. I've picked up stranded motorists before. It's just something you do out on these lonely stretches. Most truckers I know would do the same. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment, opened my door, and stepped down from the cab. The fog was even more disorienting standing in it. The air felt heavy and damp, but also cold. Not just the normal chill of an October night in Missouri, but a bone-deep cold that seemed to seep right through my jacket. "Hey," I called out, "you need a ride somewhere?" The man had stopped walking when I pulled over, and now he was just standing there about 15 feet away from me. I pointed my flashlight at him, and that's when the real dread started to set in. He was wearing an old leather trucker jacket, the kind they used to make in the 70s, with the wide collar. His jeans were faded and worn, but not in the fashionable way. They looked genuinely old, but it was his face that made my blood run cold. His skin was so pale it was almost blue, with a waxy quality to it, and there was something off about the way the light hit him, like he wasn't fully solid. I could almost see the outline of the trees behind him through his body, but I told myself it had to be a trick of the fog and my flashlight. The worst part was his eyes. They were cloudy, like someone with severe cataracts, but they seemed to look through me rather than at me. Not blind exactly, but seeing something else, something that wasn't there. Or maybe seeing something that was there that I couldn't perceive. "You okay, buddy?" I asked, my voice sounding strangely muffled in the fog. "Do you need help?" He didn't respond, didn't even blink, just stared with those milky eyes. I took a step closer, thinking maybe he hadn't heard me. "I'm heading south. I can take you to the next town if you need." Still nothing. Not a word, not a nod, not even a change in his expression. Just that empty, hollow stare. Then, without any warning or acknowledgement, he turned away from me and started walking toward the tree line at the side of the road. His movements were wrong, too smooth, almost gliding, and he made no sound, no footsteps, no rustling of clothes, nothing. "Hey!" I called after him. "It's not safe in there." But he kept walking straight into the woods. I followed him to the edge of the trees, shining my flashlight into the darkness between the trunks. The fog was just as thick in there, and I could barely see more than a few yards. And then he was gone. Just gone. 1 second I could see his back as he walked between 2 large oak trees, and the next, nothing. I stood there for a good minute, scanning with my flashlight, listening for any sound of movement in the underbrush. There was nothing. No sign he had ever been there at all. I'm not ashamed to admit that I practically ran back to my truck. My hands were shaking so badly I had trouble getting the key in the ignition. Once inside, I locked the doors and sat there for a moment, trying to process what I'd just seen. My rational mind was working overtime, trying to come up with explanations. Maybe he was just some local weirdo. Maybe I was more tired than I thought and my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe the fog was making me see things that weren't really there. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen wasn't normal, wasn't natural. I started driving again, faster this time despite the fog, wanting nothing more than to get the hell out of there. After about 20 minutes, the fog began to thin out, just as suddenly as it had appeared. Within another mile, I was back under clear skies, stars visible overhead, the moon bright and normal. My radio came back to life mid-song, as if nothing had happened. The engine knock was gone too. About 10 miles further down the road, I saw the lights of a small roadside diner and rest stop. The sign said Harrington's in flickering neon. I wasn't particularly hungry, but I needed to stop, to be around normal people, to reassure myself that the world still made sense. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of locals at the counter and a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the place opened. Her name tag read Doris. She had that weathered, seen-it-all look of someone who spent their life in a small town, watching the world pass by on the highway. I ordered coffee and a slice of pie, more to have a reason to sit than because I wanted either. My hands were still trembling slightly as I picked up the mug. "You all right there, honey?" Doris asked, concern in her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I let out a nervous laugh. "You know, that might not be far off. I just had the strangest experience up the road a ways." I found myself telling her what had happened. The fog, the man, the way he disappeared. I expected her to laugh it off or look at me like I was crazy. Instead, she nodded slowly, a knowing look crossing her face. "You're not the first," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure the other customers weren't listening. "That stretch of Route 13, just past the old Sable Grove turnoff, it's got history." "What kind of history?" I asked, leaning forward. She refilled my coffee without me asking. "Back in '76, there was this trucker, local guy named Harlan Miller. He was hauling chemicals down from Kansas City when his truck went off the road right about where you saw, whatever you saw. Bad accident. The truck rolled down into a ravine that can't be seen from the highway. He was trapped in his cab for 3 days before anyone found him. By then..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "People say his spirit still walks that stretch of highway," she continued, lowering her voice. "Always trying to flag down other truckers, but nobody who stops ever hears him speak. He just leads them into the woods and vanishes." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the diner's air conditioning. "Has anyone ever followed him into the woods?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. Doris nodded. "A few. They say there's nothing there but old ruins from Sable Grove. It used to be a mining town back in the '20s before it was abandoned. But some folks who've gone in there looking for him claim they found the ravine where his truck went down. Say they could hear the sound of metal creaking like a cab being crushed and a man's voice calling for help, but they never find anything solid, just sounds and cold spots." I finished my coffee in silence, paid my bill, and thanked Doris for the information. Before I left, she put her hand on my arm. "Word of advice, honey? Take the interstate next time. Route 13 isn't worth the shortcut." I got back on the road and made it to my destination in Dallas the next day without further incident. But I haven't been able to shake the memory of that night, those milky eyes, that silence, the way he just vanished into the fog. I've driven thousands of miles since then, but I've made damn sure none of those miles were on Route 13 in Missouri. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night and the fog rolls in, I catch myself checking the side of the road a little more carefully than I used to. And when my radio occasionally cuts to static for no reason, just for a second, I find myself holding my breath, waiting to see a figure walking along the shoulder of the road, looking for someone to follow him into the darkness. Story 4. I've been a cop in Mill Creek for almost 20 years. In that time, I've seen a lot of things that would turn most people's stomachs. Fatal car wrecks, domestic violence scenes, even a couple of homicides. But what happened to me last autumn wasn't something they teach you to handle at the academy. I haven't told many people the full story. My department knows some of it, but I left most details out of my official report. I couldn't risk my reputation or my job, but I need to tell someone what really happened that night, even if nobody believes me. It was a Thursday in late October, around midnight. I was working the graveyard shift alone. Budget cuts meant we were understaffed, and Mill Creek is usually quiet enough that one patrol car can handle the overnight. I just finished my coffee at the all-night diner when the call came in, a reported disturbance at 207 Oak Street. As soon as the dispatcher said the address, I felt this weird knot in my stomach. Everyone in Mill Creek knows that house, the Harper place. It's been abandoned since the murders happened there back in 2009. The whole family was killed except for the youngest daughter, who was never found. The case went cold years ago. "Probably just kids messing around," the dispatcher said. "Neighbor reported lights and noises." "Copy that. I'm on my way," I answered, but something already felt off. The Harper house sits at the end of Oak Street, partially hidden by overgrown trees. In the daytime, it's just a sad, decaying Victorian. At night, it's something else entirely. I pulled up with my headlights illuminating the front yard. Dead leaves swirled in the beams, and the wind had picked up, making the branches scrape against each other. I grabbed my flashlight and approached cautiously. The front gate hung crooked on rusted hinges, creaking as I pushed it open. The yard was littered with years of neglect, weeds growing through cracks in the walkway, trash that had blown in and never been cleared away. The front porch steps groaned under my weight. That's when I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. Now, I'm not jumpy by nature. 20 years on the force teaches you to stay calm. But something about that door being opened set off every alarm bell in my head. The house should have been securely boarded up. I radioed in my position and that I was checking out the premises. "Do you need backup?" the dispatcher asked. "Negative. Probably just kids or homeless. I'll call if I need anything." God, I wish I'd asked for backup right then. I pushed the door open with my foot, announcing myself clearly. "Police officer, anyone inside?" My voice echoed through the empty foyer. The smell hit me immediately. Dust, mildew, and something else. Something stale and unpleasant that I couldn't identify. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper and water-damaged ceilings. The place had been ransacked years ago. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, but something felt deliberate about the disarray, like it was meant to look random but wasn't. The first floor was empty. Living room, dining room, kitchen, everything covered in dust, but I noticed something odd. There were footprints in the dust, small ones, like a child's. But they didn't make sense. They started in the middle of rooms and disappeared at walls. I figured kids had been in and out of the place for years, so I didn't think too much of it. Then I heard it. A rhythmic thumping from upstairs, like something soft hitting against wood. Thump, 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 regular as a heartbeat. "Hello? Police officer? Is anyone up there?" No response except that steady thumping. I started up the stairs, keeping my back to the wall. Each step creaked under my weight. The temperature seemed to drop with every step I took. By the time I reached the landing, I could see my breath. It was autumn in Michigan, sure, but this was different. A penetrating cold that went straight to the bone. The upstairs hallway stretched before me, with 4 doors leading to what I assumed were bedrooms. 3 of the doors stood open, but the one at the end of the hall, the one the thumping was coming from, was closed. I checked each open room, finding nothing but more decay and emptiness. Old bed frames stripped of mattresses, broken dressers, a child's desk covered in dust. In what must have been the master bedroom, the window was shattered, glass scattered across the floor. But again, something seemed wrong. The glass was on the inside, like something had broken in, not out. The thumping continued from behind the closed door, unvarying in its rhythm. As I approached, it suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was worse somehow. I reached for the doorknob and it was ice cold, so cold it almost burned my fingers. I pushed the door open, my gun drawn now, flashlight beam sweeping the room. It was empty except for an old metal bed frame and a broken dresser. The window was intact but filthy, barely letting in any moonlight. As I stepped further into the room, the door swung shut behind me with a decisive click. I spun around, but before I could reach for the handle, I heard it. "Help me." A child's voice, barely above a whisper, coming from somewhere inside the room. But there was nowhere to hide, no closet, no connecting bathroom, nowhere a child could be concealed. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice steady despite the fear creeping up my spine. "I'm here to help. Where are you?" No answer. I swept my flashlight across the room again, and that's when I saw it. Words scratched into the wallpaper, not visible until the light hit them at just the right angle. "Help us." The letters were crude, like someone had used their fingernails to carve them. And there was something dark crusted in the grooves of the letters. The air in the room grew even colder, and my flashlight beam weakened. I tapped it against my palm, trying to brighten it. Then the whispers started. Not just one voice now, but many, overlapping, coming from every corner of the room. Children's voices, adult voices, all whispering together. I couldn't make out most of the words, but phrases emerged from the chaos. "Don't let him find us. It's in the walls. She never left." I'm not ashamed to say I panicked. I turned to leave, grabbing for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. Locked or jammed, I don't know which. I put my shoulder against the door, pushing hard, ready to break it down if necessary. That's when I heard the footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate steps, coming up slowly. Not running, not sneaking, walking with purpose, and I knew with absolute certainty that whoever was coming up those stairs was not someone I wanted to meet. "This is the police!" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. "Identify yourself!" The footsteps continued, unaltered in their pace. I pounded on the door, still trying the knob. My flashlight flickered, growing dimmer. The whispers around me intensified, becoming more urgent. "He's coming! Don't look at him! Run! Run now!" Just as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, my flashlight died completely. I was plunged into darkness so absolute I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The footsteps continued down the hallway, approaching the room where I was trapped. Then, directly behind me, so close I could feel breath on my neck, a voice whispered, "Officer Greer." I whirled around. Somehow my flashlight came back on, revealing nothing. The room was empty, but the presence remained. I could feel it watching me, malevolent and ancient. The beam weakly illuminated the room, and I noticed something I'd missed before. The walls were seeping, a dark liquid oozing slowly from between the cracks in the plaster. It had the metallic smell of blood. The doorknob behind me suddenly turned, and the door swung open on its own. The hallway beyond was empty, but the footsteps had stopped right outside the room. I had a choice: stay in the room with whatever was in there with me, or step into the hallway where those footsteps had stopped. I chose the hallway, moving quickly, my gun still drawn. The corridor was empty, but colder than before. I made my way toward the stairs, fighting the urge to run. Running is never safe when you don't know what you're running from. As I reached the top of the stairs, my radio crackled to life, making me jump. Through the static, I could hear the dispatcher trying to reach me, but the words were garbled. Then, clear as day, a child's voice came through the speaker. "Don't leave us here with him." I dropped the radio like it had burned me. It clattered down the stairs, the sound echoing through the house. I followed it down, no longer caring about maintaining my composure. I just needed to get out. The first floor was darker than before, shadows seeming to move independently of my flashlight beam. The front door was still open, and I made for it, desperate for fresh air and moonlight. As I reached the threshold, a blast of cold air hit me from behind, like the house itself was exhaling. I turned back for just a moment and saw them, shadowy figures at the top of the stairs, a man, a woman, and 2 children. They weren't moving, just watching. And behind them, a taller, darker shape that seemed to absorb the light around it. I stumbled backward off the porch, nearly falling, got to my patrol car and radioed for backup, reporting a possible break-in. I didn't mention the voices or the figures. I couldn't. When 2 other officers arrived 10 minutes later, we searched the house together. We found nothing, no footprints in the dust except mine, no writing on the walls, no evidence anyone had been there. The door to that bedroom stood open, revealing an empty room with no bed frame, no dresser, just empty space. My colleagues clearly thought I was imagining things. One of them even suggested I might have inhaled some mold spores that caused hallucinations. I let them think that, but I know what I experienced, and in the months since, I've researched the Harper case extensively. What most people don't know is that before the family was murdered, the youngest daughter had been drawing pictures of a tall man who came into her room at night. The parents had dismissed it as nightmares. I requested the case files and found something that never made the news. When they found the bodies, words had been scratched into the wall of the master bedroom. "He won't let us leave." I drive by that house on every shift now, even though it's not on my regular patrol route. Sometimes I see lights inside, just brief flickers. Sometimes I think I see faces in the upstairs windows. And sometimes, when I drive past at exactly midnight, my radio picks up voices, children's voices asking for help. I don't know what's in that house. I don't know if it's the spirits of the Harper family or something that was there long before them, but I know they're trapped there. And sometimes in my nightmares, I'm trapped with them, listening to those footsteps coming up the stairs over and over again. I'm still a cop. I still don't believe in ghosts. At least, that's what I tell myself during the day. But every night when I drive by 207 Oak Street, I make sure my windows are up My doors are locked, and I never ever stop, because whatever is in that house knows my name, and sometimes I swear I can hear it calling me back. Story 5. I've been driving big rigs for 25 years now, seen pretty much everything you can imagine on America's highways. Accidents, wildlife, weather that'll make your hair stand on end. But what happened to me 6 months ago on Nevada's Route 375 still keeps me up at night. For those who don't know, Route 375 is this long, empty stretch of road that runs near Area 51. They actually call it the extraterrestrial highway because of all the UFO sightings out there. I always thought that was just tourist trap nonsense, never gave it much thought until that night. It was a Thursday in late October. I was hauling a load of electronics from Vegas to Reno, running behind schedule because of a delay at the distribution center. The dispatcher was riding my ass about making up time, so I decided to take Route 375 as a shortcut. It's desolate out there, which means no traffic and no highway patrol to worry about if you need to push the speed limit a bit. By 11:30 that night, I hadn't seen another vehicle for at least an hour. The moon was almost full, casting this eerie glow across the desert landscape. I had the windows cracked despite the chill because I was fighting fatigue. 25 years on the road and I still hate night driving, but the bills don't pay themselves. It was approaching midnight when I first saw her, a lone figure standing on the shoulder with her thumb out, just the silhouette of a woman against the moonlit desert. My first instinct was to keep driving. Anyone who drives trucks knows you don't pick up hitchhikers, especially on deserted roads in the middle of the night. It's like rule number 1, but something made me slow down. As my headlights hit her, I could see she was young, mid-20s maybe, with long dark hair whipping around in the wind. She was wearing jeans and a denim jacket that looked too thin for the cold desert night. She had this small backpack clutched to her chest. But what really got me was the look on her face, pure desperation. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her. Through my side mirror, I watched her run up to the truck. Her movements were jerky, panicked. Again, every instinct told me to just drive away, but I couldn't. I reached over and unlocked the passenger door. "Where you headed?" I asked as she climbed in. "Just away from here, north, as far as you're going." Her voice was soft but strained. She settled into the seat and immediately turned to look out the back window. "Everything okay, miss?" "Yes, thank you for stopping." She clutched her backpack tighter and kept looking behind us as I pulled back onto the highway. I introduced myself. "Name's Jack Turner." "Eleanor," she said after a moment's hesitation. Didn't offer a last name. The cab fell silent as we continued down the empty highway. I turned the radio on low just to break the tension. Eleanor kept fidgeting in her seat, her eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirrors. Her hands were trembling when she pushed her hair behind her ears. "Not many people out here this time of night," I said, trying to make conversation, "especially on foot." "My car broke down a few miles back," she replied, but her tone was unconvincing. "I've been walking for hours." I nodded, not pressing further. In my experience, people tell you what they want to tell you. But something was definitely off. Her clothes weren't dusty enough for someone who'd been walking for hours in the desert, and I hadn't passed any broken-down vehicles. At exactly 12:14, I remember looking at the dashboard clock. The radio suddenly cranked up to full volume. Static blasted through the speakers, making both of us jump. Through the white noise, I could hear fragments of voices, not speaking English, but something that sounded almost like backwards talk. I reached for the knob, but before I could touch it, the radio went completely dead. "What the hell was that?" I muttered, fiddling with the power button. When I glanced over at Eleanor, her face had gone chalk white. She was staring at the radio like it was about to explode. "They found me," she whispered so quietly I barely heard it. "Who found you?" I asked, feeling the first real prickle of unease crawl up my spine. She turned to me then, her eyes wide with genuine terror. "It's not who, it's what. I'm not a superstitious man, never believed in ghosts or aliens or any of that crap. But something about the way she said it, so matter-of-factly, made my skin crawl. "Look, if you're in some kind of trouble, you need to drive faster." She cut me off, her voice urgent. "Please, just drive faster." I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing the rig up to 75. Out there on that empty road with a full moon lighting up the landscape, you could see for miles in every direction. There was nothing behind us. No headlights, no vehicles, just empty desert stretching back to the horizon. Yet Eleanor kept staring at the mirrors like she expected to see something appear at any moment. She pulled a silver locket from inside her jacket and gripped it tightly, her knuckles turning white. I caught a glimpse of it reflecting in the dash lights, an oval-shaped pendant with some kind of floral pattern etched into the silver. "That's pretty," I said, just trying to distract her from whatever was scaring her so badly. "It was my mother's," she replied, her voice softening for the first time. "She gave it to me before I left home." The next few minutes passed in tense silence. The temperature in the cab seemed to drop, and I cranked up the heat. Eleanor had stopped looking behind us and was now staring straight up through the windshield at the night sky. "Do you ever feel like you're being watched, Jack?" she asked suddenly. Before I could answer, it happened. A blinding white light flooded the cab from above. It was so bright, so sudden, that I instinctively slammed on the brakes and raised my arm to shield my eyes. The truck skidded, the trailer swinging out behind us. I fought the wheel, trying to keep us on the road as this impossible light engulfed everything. The engine died, the headlights went out, even the dashboard lights flickered and died. But that light from above remained, so bright it hurt, with a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. I couldn't see Eleanor anymore, just a black silhouette against the white light. I called out to her, but my voice sounded muffled, like I was underwater. The light pulsed once, twice, and then it was gone. The sudden darkness was disorienting. I blinked, trying to get my eyes to adjust. The dashboard lights came back on. The engine sputtered back to life. "Eleanor," I called out, turning toward the passenger seat. She was gone. I'm not talking about the door being open and her running off. The doors were still locked, the windows were up, but the passenger seat was empty, like she'd never been there at all. I threw the truck into park and grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. I got out and walked around the truck, calling her name. Nothing. The desert was silent except for the idling engine and the blood pounding in my ears. Back in the cab, I noticed something glinting on the passenger seat. The silver locket. I picked it up, the metal cold against my fingers, and pressed the tiny latch. Inside was a faded photograph of a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with long dark hair and a familiar smile. It was Eleanor. I was certain of it. But the photo looked decades old, the colors faded to sepia tones. I don't remember much about the rest of that drive. I know I didn't stop until I reached the truck stop, in Tonopah, about 80 miles north. My hands didn't stop shaking the whole way, and I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that light again. The truck stop was nearly empty at that hour, just a couple of rigs in the lot and a waitress behind the counter inside. I ordered coffee, black, and sat there staring at the locket in my palm. "You okay, mister?" "Look like you've seen a ghost," the waitress said, refilling my cup without being asked. I don't know what made me show her the locket. Maybe I just needed someone else to see it, to confirm it was real. "Ever seen this before?" I asked, holding it out to her. She wiped her hands on her apron and took it, turning it over carefully. When she opened it and saw the photo, all the color drained from her face. "Where did you get this?" Her voice had dropped to a whisper. "A hitchhiker I picked up on 375, I said. "A young woman named Eleanor." The waitress sat down heavily in the booth across from me. "Eleanor Granger," she said. "She disappeared on that highway 50 years ago this month. I felt like someone had dumped ice water down my spine. That's impossible. I just gave her a ride tonight." The waitress, Doris, according to her name tag, shook her head slowly. "My mother went to school with her. Eleanor vanished on her way home from college for Thanksgiving break in 1972. Her car was found abandoned on Route 375, about 10 miles south of Rachel. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. She was just gone. I must have looked like I was about to pass out because Doris got up and brought me a glass of water. "You're not the first, you know," she continued. "Over the years, we've had maybe a dozen truckers come through here with stories about picking up a young woman on that stretch of highway. Always the same description. Long dark hair, denim jacket, terrified of something following her. Some of them even mentioned the locket. What happened to her?" I asked, my mouth so dry I could barely get the words out. Doris shrugged. "Nobody knows for sure, but that area has a history of strange disappearances. Some folks blame it on Area 51, say the government was testing something that night. Others talk about—" She lowered her voice. "Abductions. I didn't sleep that night, couldn't even close my eyes without seeing that blinding light again. I called in sick the next day, told the company I had food poisoning. I spent hours online researching Eleanor Granger's disappearance. It was real. She vanished on October 25, 1972. There were newspaper articles, missing person reports, even a few conspiracy theory websites linking her to alien abductions. I found a yearbook photo of her from 1971. It was her, the same woman who'd sat in my truck, the woman who'd vanished into thin air. I've been back on the road for months now, but I take the long way around Nevada these days. I keep Eleanor's locket in my glove compartment. Sometimes I think about turning it into the police or trying to find her family. But what would I say? That I picked up the ghost of a woman who disappeared 50 years ago? That something took her again, right in front of me? I don't have any answers. All I know is that something happened on Route 375 that night, something I can't explain. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night and the radio starts to static, I swear I can hear her voice through the noise, still running from whatever took her that night on the lonely highway. Story 6. 3 months ago, I purchased the Maxwell House, a Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Ashton Hollow. As an architect, I've always been drawn to historical buildings, and this place was a dream project, a chance to restore something beautiful that had been forgotten. The price was suspiciously low, but I figured it was because of the extensive renovation needed. The locals seemed surprised when I signed the papers. Now I understand why. I arrived at the property on a Thursday afternoon in October. The drive up to the house was exactly what I'd imagined, a winding gravel path through overgrown gardens, leading to this imposing structure against the backdrop of autumn trees. Despite my excitement, I felt this weird knot in my stomach as I pulled up. I brushed it off as nerves about the project's scale. The real estate agent had given me the keys, but conveniently had another appointment when I asked if she could show me around. She just handed me the keys with a tight smile and said, "It's all yours now, Ms. Carter. Good luck with the renovations." The way she said, "good luck," stuck with me. The front door creaked open with this horrible grinding sound that echoed through the empty foyer. The inside was exactly what you'd expect from a house abandoned for decades. Dust everywhere, cobwebs hanging from the chandelier, water stains on the wallpaper. But beneath all that, you could see how magnificent it once was. The grand staircase, the intricate woodwork, the stained glass windows. This place had stories to tell. I spent that first afternoon exploring, taking measurements, and making notes. Every room I entered felt colder than the last. I kept catching movement in my peripheral vision, but when I'd turn, there'd be nothing there. Just shadows playing tricks, I told myself. Old houses settle and make noise. That's normal. I'd set up a temporary bedroom in what used to be the library on the first floor. I didn't want to sleep upstairs until I'd checked the structural integrity of the second floor. I had my sleeping bag, a lantern, and some basic supplies. Nothing fancy, but enough to get by until I could make the place livable. That first night is when it started. I woke up around 3 in the morning. Not with a start, but gradually, like someone was gently pulling me out of sleep. The house was dead silent, but then I heard it whispering. so faint I thought I was imagining it. Like when you're in a crowded room and can hear conversation but can't make out the words. I sat up in my sleeping bag, holding my breath to listen. The whispers seemed to be coming from inside the walls themselves, not from one specific spot but all around me, like the house was breathing them out. I grabbed my flashlight and got up. The rational part of my brain said it was probably just the wind finding its way through cracks in the old walls, but there was no wind that night. The air outside was completely still. The whispers led me out of the library and into the main hallway. They got louder as I moved toward the back of the house, down a narrow corridor I hadn't fully explored yet. At the end was a door, nothing special about it, just a regular wooden door like all the others. But the whispers were definitely coming from behind it. My hand shook as I turned the knob. The door swung open to reveal an empty bedroom, completely empty. No furniture, no decorations, just peeling wallpaper and a window with broken shutters. But the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they got louder, now coming from every direction like I was standing in the center of a crowd of people all murmuring at once. I backed out of the room, slammed the door shut, and practically ran back to my sleeping bag. I pulled it over my head like a kid afraid of monsters and somehow eventually fell back asleep, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me in an unfamiliar place. The next morning, everything looked different in the daylight. I convinced myself I'd had a weird dream, probably triggered by sleeping in a strange place. I made myself some instant coffee on my camping stove and got to work measuring and planning the renovation. I tried to stay busy, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting to the hallway that led to that empty room. Around noon, I decided to face my fears and check it out again. In the daylight, the room looked even more ordinary. Just an old, abandoned bedroom with nothing special about it. No hidden doors, no strange markings, nothing that would explain what I'd heard. I knocked on the walls, checking for hollow spots, but everything seemed solid. I spent the rest of the day working, trying to ignore the growing unease I felt. As the sun started to set, I seriously considered packing up and spending the night at a motel in town. But that felt like giving up, and I've never been one to back down from a challenge. That was my mistake. The second night was worse, much worse. The whispers started earlier, around midnight, and they weren't as indistinct anymore. I could make out words now and then. My name was one of them. Evelyn, they'd whisper over and over. Evelyn, come, Evelyn. I sat rigid in my sleeping bag, my back against the wall, flashlight clutched in my hand, like a weapon. The whispers were coming from all directions again, but strongest from the hallway. And then I heard footsteps, light, shuffling steps moving back and forth in the corridor outside the library. I wanted to scream, but fear had frozen my vocal cords. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. The handle turned slowly, but the door didn't open. I'd locked it before going to bed. Evelyn, let us in. We've been waiting. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat there until dawn broke, watching that door handle occasionally turn on its own. When morning came, I packed up my car and drove into town. I needed coffee, real food, and human interaction. At the local diner, I casually asked the waitress about the Maxwell house. Her smile faded. Why do you want to know about that place? I told her I'd bought it, and she actually dropped her coffee pot. You're staying there, alone? She wouldn't say much more, just that the house had a history and that most locals avoided it. I tried asking a few other people in town but got similar reactions. Uncomfortable. Glances, changed subjects, or vague warnings. I should have listened. I should have sold the house right then and walked away. But I'd invested nearly all my savings in this project, and I couldn't just abandon it because of some small-town superstitions. I went back that afternoon, determined to face whatever was happening with logic and reason. I brought supplies, more lights, a better lock for my door, even sage to burn, something my New Age cousins swore would cleanse negative energy. None of it made any difference. The third night was when things escalated beyond whispers. I'd barely closed my eyes when the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. My breath clouded in front of me. The whispers started immediately, louder than before, almost at normal speaking volume. "Evelyn, join us, underneath, in the walls." Something scratched at my door, not like an animal, but like fingernails, human fingernails, dragging slowly down the wood. I couldn't take it anymore. I hadn't slept properly in days. I couldn't eat. My nerves were shot. Something in me just snapped. I grabbed the sledgehammer I'd brought for demo work and stormed out of the library. The hallway was freezing cold and the whispers surrounded me, but I didn't care anymore. I was beyond fear. "You want me?" I screamed. "Fine. Where are you? Show yourselves." I followed the voices to that same empty room and started smashing the walls. Plaster and lath exploded outward with each hit. I was crying, screaming, swinging the hammer with all my strength, and then I broke through to something. Behind the wall was a space. Not a proper room, more like a sealed-off cavity between walls. The smell hit me first, that ancient, dusty smell of things long undisturbed. I shined my flashlight into the hole I'd made and saw them. Bones. Human bones. Dozens of skulls and skeletal remains piled on top of each other in this hidden chamber. Some still had scraps of clothing clinging to them. One had a gold locket around its neck bones. I stumbled backward, dropping the hammer. The whispers rose to a roar. "We are here. We have been waiting for you." I turned to run, but my foot caught on the hammer. I fell backward, hitting my head on the corner of the doorframe. Everything went dark. When I came to, I wasn't alone anymore. They stood around me in a circle, dark, shadowy figures with no distinct features except for their eyes, which glowed faintly in the darkness. I could see through them to the walls behind. Their hands, or what passed for hands, reached toward me. The first one touched my arm and it felt like plunging my skin into ice water. I screamed, trying to scramble away, but there were too many of them. They surrounded me completely. "Join us," they whispered in unison. "Join us in the walls." I felt the room closing in, the walls literally moving inward. The bones from the hidden chamber began spilling out through the hole I'd made, clattering across the floor toward me. A skull rolled to a stop right in front of my face, its empty eye sockets somehow looking directly into mine. With strength born of absolute terror, I broke free of their circle and ran. Out of the room, down the hallway, through the house, and into my car. I drove away so fast I nearly crashed twice, not stopping until I reached the next town over. I haven't been back. I called the police from a motel room reporting the human remains, but when they investigated, they found nothing. No hidden chamber, no bones, just the damage I'd done with the sledgehammer. They think I had some kind of breakdown. Maybe I did. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I'm writing this from my cousin's apartment 3 states away. I've put the Maxwell house up for sale, though I doubt anyone will buy it. Sometimes I still hear the whispers, right on the edge of sleep, calling my name, telling me they're still waiting. And sometimes I wake up to find a fine layer of plaster dust on my pillow, though. There's no construction anywhere nearby. I don't know what happened in that house or what those things wanted from me, but I know they're not finished with me yet. Story 7. My family moved to this small town in New England last summer. Dad got a job at the local university's history department, and Mom was excited about the charming colonial house we found. It was at the edge of town, where the yards give way to dense forest. The realtor called it Whispering Woods, which I thought was just a cute marketing name at the time. The locals gave us weird looks when we mentioned where we'd bought. At the grocery store, the old cashier lady actually stopped scanning our items and just stared at Mom. "That house? Right by the woods?" When Mom nodded, the lady just shook her head and muttered something under her breath. Mom laughed it off later, saying small towns always had their superstitions. Dad was worse. When our neighbor, Mr. Callahan, tried to tell him about those strange occurrences in those woods, Dad went into full professor mode. Local folklore is fascinating. Mass hysteria and shared cultural mythology have psychological explanations. He went on until Mr. Callahan just gave up and walked away. I was 15, caught between thinking the whole thing was stupid and being secretly intrigued. The woods did look creepy from my bedroom window. The trees were ancient, gnarled things with trunks twisted like they'd been frozen mid-writhe. Even in daylight, it was weirdly dark in there. School started and I quickly figured out I was the weird new kid. No one was outright mean, but I ate lunch alone and spent most days hoping someone would talk to me. By the third week, I was restless and bored after school, with Mom working late shifts at the hospital and Dad still at the university until evening. That's when I decided to check out the woods. It was a Tuesday afternoon in September. The air had that first hint of fall crispness. I told myself I'd just walk along the edge, no big deal. I grabbed my phone for pictures, not because I was scared or anything, and headed out. The woods were different up close. The silence hit me first. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just this heavy quiet that made me too aware of my own breathing. The trees seemed to lean inward, creating a tunnel effect that pulled me deeper. I snapped a few photos but kept going. I don't know how long I walked. My phone showed only 30 minutes had passed, but it felt longer. The trees got thicker, blocking out more and more sunlight until I reached a small clearing. That's where I found it, the stone circle. It wasn't impressive like Stonehenge or anything. Just 7 rough stones about waist high, arranged in a perfect circle. But the way they stood there, like they were waiting, made my skin crawl. They were covered in symbols I'd never seen before. Not quite letters, not quite pictures. Swirls and angles that somehow hurt my eyes if I looked too long. In the center was a larger stone, flat on top like an altar. The symbols on this one seemed deeper, more deliberate, almost like they were pulsing. I blinked hard, telling myself it was just shadows from the trees. I don't know why I touched it. Stupid curiosity, I guess. The surface wasn't cold like I expected. It felt warm, almost alive, and the second my fingertips made contact, I heard them. Whispers, not from any direction I could point to. They were inside my head, but also all around me. Multiple voices speaking together in perfect unison. Leave while you can. I yanked my hand back like the stone had burned me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over one of the smaller stones. The whispers faded, but the feeling of being watched didn't. I ran all the way home, crashing through underbrush, branches scraping my face and arms. I didn't stop until I burst through our back door, gasping for breath. Mom was home early, making dinner. "Daniel, what happened?" She looked alarmed, probably because I was pale and scratched up. I almost told her everything. But then Dad walked in, and I could already hear his rational explanations. Wind in the trees, an overactive imagination. So I just mumbled something about falling while exploring and went upstairs to shower. That night, I kept my curtains tightly closed. I didn't want to see the woods. But around 3 in the morning, I woke up to scratching at my window. Soft, persistent, like fingernails on glass. Then came the whispers again. "Return to us, Daniel. We're waiting for you, Daniel. You belong with us, Daniel." They knew my name. How did they know my name? I pulled my blanket over my head like a little kid, squeezing my eyes shut. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my window, my open window. I know I closed it. I always close my window at night, but there it was, wide open, the curtains fluttering in the morning breeze, and on the windowsill, a single leaf, brown and withered but clearly marked with the same symbols from the stones. I should have told someone. I should have shown that leaf to my parents or a teacher or anyone, but I didn't. Instead, I hid it in my desk drawer and tried to forget about it, but I couldn't stop thinking about the stone circle, the symbols, the whispers. Something was pulling at me like a hook behind my navel, tugging me back toward those woods. After school, instead of going home, I found myself walking toward the tree line again. My feet seemed to know exactly where to go, even though I hadn't paid attention to the path yesterday. Within minutes, I was back at the clearing. The stones looked different now. The symbols were definitely glowing, a faint bluish light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air felt charged, like right before a lightning storm. The central stone was calling to me. I could feel it. I tried to resist, I swear I did. But it was like fighting gravity. My hand reached out almost on its own. When my fingers touched the stone this time, the ground shook. Not like an earthquake, more like the earth itself was breathing. The blue glow from the symbols intensified, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. And from the ground around the stones, a dark mist began to rise. It wasn't like normal fog. This stuff moved with purpose, twisting and curling like living tendrils. It wrapped around my ankles first, ice cold and somehow solid. I tried to pull away but couldn't move. "You shouldn't have come back," the whispers said, but louder now, almost at normal speaking volume. "But we're glad you did." The mist climbed higher, up my legs, my waist. I opened my mouth to scream, but the mist rushed in, choking me with its bitter coldness. Through watering eyes, I saw the symbols on the stones glowing brighter, brighter, until they were almost blinding. "You belong to us now." This voice was different from the whispers, deeper, ancient. It seemed to come from the central stone itself, which was now hovering several inches above the ground. The gap beneath it widened, revealing not dirt, but a swirling darkness deeper than any night I'd ever seen. The tendrils of mist pulled me toward it with terrifying strength. I fought. God, I fought so hard. My fingernails broke as I clawed at the ground. I screamed my parents' names, bargained, begged. Nothing helped. As the darkness pulled me in, I saw things moving in that void. Shapes that shouldn't exist, with too many angles and parts that moved wrong. Eyes opened where there shouldn't be eyes. The last thing I remember clearly is looking up at the patch of sky above the clearing, a perfect circle of blue framed by trees, getting smaller and smaller as I was dragged down. Then darkness, cold, voices. I don't know how to explain what happened next. Time doesn't work right here. Sometimes it feels like I've been trapped for hours. Sometimes it feels like centuries. The darkness shifts and moves. The voices never stop talking, but I can't understand what they're saying anymore. Sometimes I see glimpses of the real world, like looking through windows that open for just seconds. I've seen search parties with flashlights, my mom crying, my dad looking older overnight, police with dogs that refuse to enter the clearing. No one can find the stone circle anymore. It's not there when they look, but it's still here with me, wherever here is. I know my parents are still searching. 5 months have passed in their world. Mom's hair is going gray. Dad doesn't lecture about folklore anymore. I've tried to reach out, to whisper to them like the voices whispered to me, but the only people who seem to hear are strangers who wander too close to the woods at night. All I can do is warn them. Leave while you can. No one listens. No one ever listens. I'm writing this, somehow. I don't have a pen or paper or phone, but I'm pushing these words out through whatever crack I can find between this place and yours. Maybe someone will read them. Maybe someone will understand. If you live near woods that people whisper about, if you find stones with symbols that hurt your eyes, if you hear voices calling your name when no one's there, run. Don't touch anything, don't go back, because I'm still here, trapped with the things in the dark. And sometimes, when new people walk in the whispering woods at night, I feel the darkness around me get hungry. They're looking for someone else now. They're always looking, and I can't help but whisper your name when they make me call. Story 8. I've been driving trucks for 20 years. 20 years of highways, truck stops, and sunrises through a windshield. I've seen just about everything you can imagine on the road. Wildlife, accidents, crazy drivers, you name it. But what happened to me 3 months ago on Highway 50 in Nevada? I still can't explain it. I haven't told many people because, well, who would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. It was a Thursday night in late October. I was hauling refrigerated goods from Sacramento to Salt Lake City, which meant crossing through Nevada on Highway 50. If you're not familiar with it, they call it the loneliest road in America, and for good reason. Miles and miles of nothing but desert, mountains, and sky. During the day, it's beautiful in a desolate kind of way. At night, it's something else entirely. I'd driven this route dozens of times before, usually during daylight hours, but I was behind schedule that day, had a late pickup because of some inventory issues at the warehouse. By the time I hit the Nevada state line, the sun was already setting. I wasn't worried though. Night driving can be peaceful, and I had my podcasts and radio to keep me company. Around 11:30 at night, I was deep into the most isolated stretch of Highway 50, somewhere east of Fallon. The moon was barely visible behind some clouds, and I hadn't passed another vehicle in over an hour. The landscape around me was just shapes and shadows, rocky hills and scrubby desert that disappeared into darkness beyond my headlights. I remember feeling unusually tired, not normal end-of-day tired, but a heavy, foggy kind of exhaustion that seemed to come on suddenly. I cranked up the AC and rolled down my window, slapped my face a couple times. The cold air helped a little. I reached for the radio to find something upbeat to keep me alert, but all I got was static. I tried my phone to play a podcast, but I had no signal out there. Not surprising, but annoying. The static on the radio got louder, then cut out completely. Even the dash light seemed to dim for a second. I remember thinking I should check the electrical system when I stopped next, but I was still about 70 miles from the next town with a proper truck stop. That's when I saw him. Right in the middle of the road, illuminated in my headlights, was a man, just standing there. Not moving, not trying to flag me down, just standing. I hit the brakes hard, the truck skidding slightly as I came to a stop about 20 feet from him. My heart was hammering in my chest. Where the hell had he come from? There was nothing out here for miles. No broken down car on the shoulder, no side road, nothing. I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the wheel. The man hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to my truck bearing down on him. He just stood there facing me. "Hey!" I called out my window. "You okay, buddy?" No response. I should have just called it in on the CB radio and kept driving. That would have been the smart thing to do. But 20 years of driving makes you feel responsible somehow. I couldn't just leave someone stranded out in the Nevada desert at midnight. So I put on my hazards, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out of the cab. The night air hit me like a slap, colder than it should have been for October, with a stillness that made the hair on my arms stand up. I could hear nothing but the idle of my engine and the occasional ping of the cooling metal. "Hello?" I called out, walking slowly toward the figure. "Do you need help?" As I got closer, I could see him better. He was tall and thin, wearing what looked like work clothes, faded pants and a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled up. But they weren't modern clothes, they looked old, like something from the 40s or 50s, all dirty and worn. But it was his face that made me stop about 10 feet away from him. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost gray in my flashlight beam, and it had a strange texture, dry and cracked like sun-baked mud. His eyes were what really got to me, though. They were open but glazed over with a milky film. They didn't seem to be focusing on anything, yet I had the distinct feeling he was watching me. "Sir?" My voice came out shakier than I intended. "Do you need medical help?" That's when he moved. It wasn't natural movement. It was jerky, mechanical almost, like those old stop-motion films. His head rotated toward me, then his arm raised up, pointing down the road in the direction I had been heading. I followed where he was pointing, squinting into the darkness. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed 2 pinpoints of light in the distance, growing larger. Headlights. Relief washed over me. Another vehicle. Maybe they knew something about this strange man, or could at least call for help when they reached the next town. I turned back to the man. "There's someone coming. We'll get you some help, okay?" He didn't respond. He just kept pointing, his arm rigid, those milky eyes now fixed on the approaching lights. I stepped back toward my truck, keeping my eyes on both the strange man and the approaching vehicle. As the headlights grew closer, I could tell it was another semi. I raised my hand to flag them down, but something felt wrong. The headlights were odd. They weren't the bright LEDs or halogens you see on modern trucks. They were dimmer, yellowish, and they flickered occasionally like old-fashioned filament bulbs. As the truck got closer, I could make out more details and my blood ran cold. This wasn't a modern rig, it was ancient, the kind of truck you'd see in a museum or a vintage photograph. It was rusted and weathered, with a rounded cab and old-style fenders. The chrome was dull, and parts of it seemed to shimmer strangely in the moonlight, almost like I was looking at it through water. The truck was moving fast, too fast for these conditions. I backed up further, toward my own rig. "Hey!" I shouted at the strange man. "You need to move. Get off the road." He didn't move. He just kept pointing as the old truck barreled toward us. I was about to run and physically pull him out of the way when something caught my eye. The approaching truck's cab. I could see through the windshield now, illuminated by my truck's headlights. There was no one driving it. The cab was empty. I froze. This couldn't be happening. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But when I looked again, the phantom truck was still coming, still driverless, now only about 100 yards away. I turned to grab the strange man, but he was gone. Vanished. There 1 second, gone the next. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was no sign of him anywhere on the empty road. The old truck was almost upon me now. I dove to the side of the road, landing hard on the gravel shoulder. I covered my head, expecting to hear the crash as it hit my parked rig. Instead, I felt a blast of cold air pass over me, accompanied by the sound of an engine that wasn't quite right. It was muffled, distant somehow, like hearing it underwater. I looked up just in time to see the rusted old truck pass right through my semi, as if one or both of them weren't solid matter. The phantom truck continued down the highway, its taillights flickering like dying embers until they disappeared around a bend in the road. I sat there in the dirt, unable to move, unable to process what I'd just seen. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my flashlight. The night was silent again, as if nothing had happened. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I managed to get to my feet. My truck was still there, idling peacefully, completely untouched. No damage, no sign that another vehicle had passed through it like a ghost. I climbed back into the cab with shaky legs and locked the doors. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? And tell them what? That I'd seen a ghost man and a phantom truck on Highway 50. They'd breathalyze me and search my cab for drugs. I sat there for a while, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and dreamed the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. It had been too real, too detailed. Eventually, I put the truck in gear and started driving again, much faster than I should have. I just wanted to get to somewhere with people, with lights and noise and normality. About 45 minutes later, I pulled into a truck stop in Millbrook. It wasn't much, just a gas station with a small diner attached, but it was open 24 hours and there were 3 other trucks parked there. I'd never been so happy to see fluorescent lighting in my life. I went inside, probably looking like hell. There was an older waitress behind the counter and a couple of locals at a table in the corner. They all looked up when I came in. "Coffee," I managed to say as I slid onto a stool. "Black, please." The waitress, her name tag said Doris, gave me a long look as she poured the coffee. "You all right, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed nervously, the sound catching in my throat. "Something like that." She set the mug down in front of me. "Where you coming from this time of night?" "West," I said, my hands still trembling slightly as I reached for the coffee. "Taking 50 through to Salt Lake." The diner got quiet. I noticed the locals at the table had stopped talking and were looking at me. "You didn't take 50 through Black Canyon, did you?" one of them asked. He was an older guy, probably in his 70s, with leathery skin and a trucker cap. I didn't know the name of the area I'd passed through, but something in his tone made my skin crawl. "I came through about 45 minutes west of here. There's a stretch where the road runs between some hills." The old man nodded slowly, exchanging looks with his companion. "That's Black Canyon, all right." "Why?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Doris sighed, topping off my coffee without me asking. "You saw something out there, didn't you?" Hesitated, then nodded. "A man, standing in the road. And then an old truck, but No driver, the old man finished for me. My blood ran cold. How did you know that? The old man got up and came over to the counter, taking the stool next to mine. There used to be a mining town up in those hills, he said, his voice low. Place called Coleridge, dried up in the 50s when the mine closed. Most folks left, but some stayed on, trying to make a go of it. There was an accident, Doris continued, leaning on the counter. 1957, a truck carrying mining explosives lost control coming down from the old mine road onto the highway. Crashed and exploded, killed the driver and a man who was walking along the road, a former miner who'd been laid off. Some say the town was cursed after that, the old man said. The last few residents cleared out within a year, but some folks believe they never really left, if you know what I mean. The trucker and the miner, I said slowly. That's who I saw? Could be, the old man nodded. Some of them still walk the highway looking for help. People have been seeing them for years. My daddy used to talk about it back in the 60s. The man I saw pointed at the truck, I said, like he was warning me. Maybe he was, Doris said. Or maybe he's just reliving his last moments over and over, poor soul. I finished my coffee in silence, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wanted to dismiss their explanation as small-town superstition, but after what I'd seen with my own eyes, I couldn't. I ended up staying at the truck stop until dawn. Couldn't bring myself to get back on that road in the dark. When I finally did leave, I took a different route, a longer one that added 2 hours to my journey. I didn't care. I've made a dozen runs to Salt Lake since then, and I've never taken Highway 50 through Nevada again. I go the long way around every time, no matter what it does to my schedule or fuel costs. But sometimes, even on other desert highways at night, I think I see things in my peripheral vision, pale figures standing on the shoulder or distant headlights that don't seem to get any closer. I never slow down to check. I just grip the wheel tighter and keep driving until I reach the next town, the next pool of light in the darkness. 20 years on the road, and I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. Now, I'm not so sure. All I know is that there are things out there in the empty places, things that don't make sense, things that shouldn't exist. And sometimes they cross paths with the living. I still drive for a living. I have to, it's all I know. But I never drive through Black Canyon again, and I always keep moving when I'm on a lonely road at night. Story 9. I still can't explain what happened to me last week on Highway 281. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself I was just tired or hallucinating from exhaustion, but I know what I saw. I'm writing this down partly to get it off my chest, and partly because I'm hoping someone else has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not going crazy. I'm a software engineer in Austin, been coding for about 7 years now. I deal with logic and algorithms all day, and I've always considered myself pretty level-headed. I never bought into ghost stories or supernatural stuff. When friends would talk about seeing ghosts or having experiences, I'd nod politely while thinking they were either exaggerating or had some psychological explanation for what they saw. Last Tuesday, I drove to Houston to visit my brother who just had his second kid. I stayed longer than planned, helping him assemble this ridiculously complicated crib that came with instructions that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. By the time we finished, it was already past midnight, and I had work the next day. Decided to head back to Austin rather than crash at his place. The main interstate was closed for construction, something I discovered when my GPS rerouted me. It directed me to Highway 281, which I'd never taken before. At first, I was just annoyed about the detour, adding extra time to my drive. The highway started out normal enough, but after a few miles, the surroundings changed dramatically. Streetlights disappeared, and the road narrowed to just 2 lanes, one in each direction. On both sides, there was nothing but vast farmland, occasionally broken up by patches of dense trees. The darkness felt heavy, like it was pressing against my car windows. I turned on the radio for some company, but all I got was static. Weird, since I usually get at least a few stations even in remote areas. I tried connecting my phone to play some music, but there was no signal. That's when I first noticed this strange feeling creeping up my spine, like someone was watching me. I kept checking my rear view mirror, but the road behind me was empty. I remember checking the time on my dashboard, 2:17 in the morning. The road stretched endlessly ahead, my headlights cutting through darkness so thick it seemed almost solid. I hadn't passed another car in at least 20 minutes, and I hadn't seen any signs of civilization. No houses, no gas stations, nothing but that endless road. About 30 minutes into this stretch, I spotted something on the roadside ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer, or maybe a road sign I hadn't noticed before. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. They were just standing there. On the side of the road in the middle of nowhere at almost 3 in the morning. The figure was hunched over slightly and I couldn't make out their face. It was obscured by shadows, even when my headlights should have illuminated it. Every instinct told me not to stop. In any other situation, I might have slowed down to see if someone needed help, but something felt wrong. The way they were standing was unnatural, too still, like a mannequin placed there as some sick joke. I accelerated instead, pushing my speed up to about 60 miles per hour. As I passed the figure, I noticed they didn't move at all, didn't turn their head, didn't flinch, didn't react in any way to my car speeding past just a few feet away. Just stood there, motionless. I checked my rearview mirror as soon as I passed, expecting to see the figure still standing there, but the road behind me was empty, completely empty. There was no way they could have moved out of sight that quickly. I'm talking about 2, maybe 3 seconds between passing them and checking my mirror. It was impossible. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed down harder on the gas pedal. I just wanted to get through this stretch of road as quickly as possible. For about 15 minutes I drove with white knuckles, constantly checking my mirrors and scanning the roadside. I started to calm down a bit, telling myself I had imagined it, or maybe it was just someone waiting for a ride, though that made absolutely no sense out here. Then my headlights flickered. It was brief, maybe half a second of complete darkness before they came back on. But in that moment, I felt a cold dread wash over me. I've had my car for 3 years and never had electrical problems. The flickering stopped as quickly as it started, and I tried to convince myself it was nothing. 15 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the darkness lasted longer, maybe 3 or 4 seconds. I had slowed down instinctively, afraid of driving blind on this unfamiliar road. When the lights came back on, I nearly drove off the road. Standing directly in the middle of the highway, about 50 feet ahead of me, was the same figure. I slammed on my brakes, skidding slightly before coming to a stop about 20 feet away from whatever it was. The figure was just as motionless as before, standing perfectly still in the center of my lane. My headlights were shining directly on it, but somehow its face remained in shadow. I could make out the shape of a person wearing what looked like dark, loose-fitting clothes, but details were impossible to discern. I sat there for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds, frozen with indecision. I honked my horn, a short, sharp blast that should have startled anyone. The figure didn't react at all. I remember thinking, this isn't possible. People don't just appear in the middle of highways. I started inching my car forward, hoping they would move aside. That's when the figure moved, but not like a person walks or runs. It glided. I don't know how else to describe it. One moment it was 20 feet away, and the next it was closer, without any of the natural movement of walking, like someone had taken a video and cut out frames. I floored it. I don't remember consciously making the decision. My foot just slammed down on the accelerator, and I swerved around the figure, nearly losing control of my car. As I shot past, I couldn't help looking to my right. It was turning its head to follow my car, the movement unnaturally smooth. I still couldn't see a face, just darkness where features should have been. I kept driving, way over the speed limit, constantly checking my mirrors to make sure it wasn't somehow behind me. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I kept expecting my headlights to flicker again, kept expecting to see that figure standing in the road ahead. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. Every shadow, every tree, every curve in the road made my heart rate spike. Finally, I saw lights ahead, a gas station, its fluorescent sign buzzing in the night. I pulled in so fast I nearly hit the pump. The station looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. Peeling paint, old-style pumps, a single flickering light over the entrance to the convenience store. I sat in my car for a minute, trying to calm down enough to go inside. Part of me was afraid to leave the relative safety of my car, but I needed to be around another human being, needed to reassure myself that the world was still normal. The clerk was an older man, probably in his 60s, with weathered skin and grey stubble. He barely looked up when I walked in, just nodded slightly. I asked if I could use the bathroom, then splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. I looked pale and shaken. When I came out, I bought a coffee, even though the pot looked like it had been sitting there all night. I needed an excuse to talk to the clerk. "Is there something wrong with Highway 281? I asked, trying to sound casual and probably failing miserably. He looked up then, studied my face for a moment. "You saw something out there, didn't you?" he asked, his voice matter of fact. I felt a chill run through me. "What do you mean?" "Happens every now and then. People come in here looking like you do. Seen things on that stretch of road, things that ain't supposed to be there." He said it so calmly, like he was discussing the weather. "What things?" I asked, my mouth dry despite the coffee I'd just sipped. "Ghosts, or something like them." He shrugged. "Been working here 15 years, heard all kinds of stories, figures standing on the road, lights that flicker, people disappearing." "People disappearing?" My voice cracked slightly. "Not often. Maybe once every few years. Car found abandoned on the side of the road. Driver never found." He must have seen the horror on my face because he added, "Most folks just get scared like you, see something they can't explain and drive on." I asked him if he knew why, if there was some history to the road, some explanation. He just shrugged again and said the land had bad memories. He wouldn't elaborate further, just told me I was almost through the worst stretch and would hit a more populated area in about 20 minutes. I got back in my car and drove the rest of the way to Austin with all my windows up and doors locked, jumping at every shadow. I made it home as the sun was rising, exhausted but too wired to sleep. It's been 5 days now, and I still can't make sense of what happened. I've researched Highway 281, looking for accidents or murders or anything that might explain what I saw. There are a few forum posts from people claiming to have had similar experiences, but nothing conclusive. The rational part of my brain keeps trying to explain it away. Fatigue, stress, maybe I was falling asleep at the wheel and dreaming. But I know what I saw. That figure wasn't human, at least not anymore. The way it moved, the way it appeared and disappeared, the unnatural stillness of it, none of that can be explained by science or logic. I used to think people who believed in ghosts were just seeing what they wanted to see, interpreting normal events through a supernatural lens. Now I'm not so sure. There are things out there that defy explanation, things that exist in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. I've cancelled my plans to visit my brother next month. If I do go, I'll take the long way around, even if it adds hours to my trip. No construction detour is worth driving Highway 281 at night again. Some roads should be left untraveled after dark. Story 10. I still don't know how to explain what happened to me last fall. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know I'm never setting foot on Highway 46 again. I'm a marketing executive based in Austin. Nothing special or unusual about me. I pay my taxes, I enjoy true crime podcasts, and I used to roll my eyes whenever my grandmother talked about ghosts or spirits. I was the practical one in the family, always finding the logical explanation. That changed after my business trip to San Antonio last October. It had been a long day of client meetings. By the time I wrapped up around 7 in the evening, I was exhausted but still facing a 90-minute drive back to Austin. As I was getting into my car, my GPS notification popped up showing major construction delays on I-35. Great. Just what I needed after being on my feet all day, smiling until my face hurt. The app suggested an alternate route that would save me about an hour, Highway 46. I'd never taken it before, but I was tired and just wanted to get home to my apartment and my cat. The route looked straightforward enough on the map, cutting through some rural areas before reconnecting with the main highway closer to Austin. An hour saved meant I could actually get some sleep before my 8 a.m. meeting the next day. It was a no-brainer. The first 10 minutes on Highway 46 were uneventful. The road was well paved but narrow, with thick woods pressing in on both sides. The trees were dense enough that even with a full moon, their shadows made the road seem darker than it should have been. I remember thinking it was pretty in a lonely sort of way. About 30 minutes in, something changed. The air seemed to thicken around my car. At first I thought it was just low-hanging clouds, but then it transformed into this heavy fog that appeared out of nowhere, and I mean nowhere. 1 minute the road was clear, the next I was enveloped in this dense white mist that my headlights couldn't penetrate more than 20 feet ahead. I slowed down, clutching the steering wheel tighter. My knuckles were white. The rational part of my brain said fog is normal in these parts, especially in the fall. But this felt different. It moved wrong. Instead of drifting naturally, it seemed to curl around my car, almost like it was, I don't know, examining me. That was the moment I realized I hadn't seen another car in miles. Not a single pair of headlights or taillights, no houses, no gas stations, nothing but trees and fog, and this increasingly claustrophobic feeling that I'd somehow driven off the map. I checked my phone to call my roommate, thinking maybe I should just pull over and wait for the fog to clear. No signal, not even one bar. My GPS was still working somehow, but the blue dot showing my location seemed to jitter and jump every few seconds, like it couldn't quite place me. The silence was the worst part. With my windows up and the radio off, it had devolved into static about 10 minutes into the fog. All I could hear was my own breathing and the hum of the engine. I turned the radio back on just to have some noise, but all I got was this low, persistent static that somehow made everything worse. Then I saw the lights. At first, I felt relief wash over me. Lights meant people, civilization, maybe a chance to pull over and collect myself. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't moving. They weren't headlights at all. 2 yellow lanterns hung on either side of what looked like an old farmhouse, set back maybe 50 yards from the road. I should have kept driving. Every horror movie I've ever seen screamed at me to keep going. But something about that house, I can't explain it. It was like it was calling to me, not in a supernatural way, at least that's what I told myself, but in a, this is the only sign of life I've seen in miles and I'm freaking out kind of way. I pulled over to the shoulder of the road, leaving my engine running and headlights on. The house was clearly abandoned, paint peeling, shutters hanging crooked, no driveway or mailbox. Just this decrepit 2-story structure that had no business still standing. And those lanterns, perfectly maintained and glowing warmly, completely at odds with the state of the house. My hand hovered over the door handle as I debated getting out. That's when I saw the movement in the upstairs window, just a shadow at first, passing slowly from one side to the other. Not hurried, but deliberate, like whatever it was knew I was watching. My heart jumped into my throat. I told myself it was probably just the lantern light playing tricks, or maybe an animal that had made its home in the abandoned building. But deep down, I knew better. I was about to put the car in drive when the front door of the house opened. It didn't swing open dramatically. It just eased open with this long, drawn-out creak that somehow carried across the distance to my car. A figure emerged from the darkness of the doorway, tall, unnaturally tall, and draped in what looked like an old, tattered robe or cloak. I couldn't see its face. I don't think there was a face to see, just shadows where features should have been. The way it moved, God, the way it moved still haunts me. Not walking, not exactly. More like gliding, as if its feet weren't quite touching the ground. Smooth and steady directly toward my car. I've never moved so fast in my life. I threw the car into drive and floored it, tires spinning against the wet asphalt before catching and launching me forward. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. The fog seemed to get thicker as I drove, pressing against my windows like it was trying to get in. My headlights barely cut through it, and more than once I nearly drove off the road because I couldn't see the lines. I must have been going 80-90 miles an hour down this twisting rural highway, but I didn't care. Nothing mattered except getting away. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the fog lifted, just vanished. 1 second I was drowning in it. The next I was under a clear night sky with stars spread out above me. The road ahead was empty and visible, and for a moment I felt this crushing relief. That's when my headlights started to flicker. Just small surges at first, brightening and dimming like they were breathing. Then the dashboard lights joined in, pulsing in the same rhythm. The radio, which had been static for so long, suddenly blared to life at full volume, cycling through stations faster than I could process. Numbers, voices, music, all blending together in this cacophony that filled the car. I tried to turn it off, but the knob came off in my hand. The steering wheel grew hot to the touch, and then the engine made this horrible grinding noise before cutting out completely. My car rolled to a stop in the middle of the highway. Dead silence. No radio, no engine, not even the tick of cooling metal. Just me, hyperventilating in the driver's seat, too afraid to get out but knowing I couldn't stay. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw it, the same figure from the house, standing in the middle of the road behind my car. It hadn't been following me. It was like it had just appeared there. Still draped in that tattered robe, still with that empty shadow where a face should be. It began moving toward me with that same gliding motion, steady and inevitable. I tried to restart the car, turning the key again and again, but nothing happened, not even a click. The doors had locked themselves somehow, and the electronic buttons wouldn't respond when I pressed them. The figure stopped about 10 feet from my car. It raised what I assume was an arm, pointing directly at me through the back window, and then it spoke. I didn't hear it with my ears. The sound was in my head, all around me, inside me. A voice like water rushing over stones, like wind through dead leaves, like a record playing at the wrong speed, distorted and wrong in ways I can't describe. It said my name, not Laura, my full name, Elizabeth Laura Chen, the name on my birth certificate that I never use. And then it said something else, something in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood in that moment. I've tried to remember the exact words since then, but they slip away whenever I get close, like trying to hold on to a dream after waking. Whatever it said, my car roared back to life immediately afterward. The headlights blazed, brighter than they should have been capable of. The radio settled on a single station, playing a song I recognized from my childhood. Everything normal, as if nothing had happened. I didn't hesitate. I floored it again, driving well over the speed limit all the way back to Austin. I didn't stop for gas, even though the needle was hovering near empty. I didn't stop to use the bathroom or get coffee to stay awake. I drove straight home, looking in my mirror every few seconds, expecting to see that figure standing in the road behind me. I made it home around midnight. My roommate asked why I looked like I'd seen a ghost, and I laughed it off, blamed it on exhaustion. What else could I say? That I'd been stalked by some supernatural entity on a forgotten highway, that it knew my name. It's been 6 months, and I still haven't told anyone the full story until now. I've made excuses to avoid any work trips that would take me near Highway 46. I've researched the area, looking for any history of hauntings or disappearances, but found nothing concrete. Just vague forum posts from people who've had strange experiences on that stretch of road. The strangest part? When I tried to find the house on Google Maps, it wasn't there. Just unbroken forest on both sides of the highway where I know I saw it standing. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I can hear that voice again, saying my name from the darkness of my bedroom. Sometimes my car radio will suddenly switch stations on its own, searching for something I can't identify. And sometimes, when fog rolls in over Austin, I swear I can see a tall figure standing at the edge of my apartment complex, looking up at my window, watching, waiting. For what? I don't know. I know what happened to me on Highway 46. I don't know what that thing was or what it wanted from me, but I know it was real. And I know that whatever it was, it's not done with me yet. Story 11. I still can't sleep. It's been 3 weeks since I got off that damn ship, and every time I close my eyes, I hear those whispers. The doctors say it's PTSD. Maybe they're right, but they weren't there. They didn't see what I saw on the MS Elysium. I'm a journalist, travel and lifestyle mostly. Nothing too heavy, just fluff pieces about luxury destinations and celebrity hotspots. My editor called me into his office last month and dropped the assignment on my desk. A feature on the maiden voyage of the MS Elysium, the most technologically advanced cruise liner ever built. 5-star accommodations, AI-integrated amenities, sustainable energy systems, the works. The PR team was calling it the future of maritime leisure. If only they knew. I'd been working non-stop for months and was desperate for some sun, so I jumped at the chance. A week in the Caribbean on someone else's dime? Sign me up. Plus, my apartment in Chicago had started to feel like a prison. I needed the ocean air, needed to get away from the noise and the deadlines and the endless winter. I thought the Elysium would be my escape. Turns out, some people never escaped it at all. The ship was gorgeous, I'll give them that. 42 decks of gleaming white steel and glass, rising from the water like some futuristic castle. I boarded in Miami on a Tuesday afternoon. The terminal was buzzing with excitement, champagne flowing, cameras flashing, celebrities mingling with corporate execs in their designer suits. I remember thinking it felt more like a movie premiere than a cruise departure. My suite was on deck 18, Serenity level, they called it. Floor-to-ceiling windows, king-size bed, marble bathroom, personal AI assistant. The works. I spent that first day exploring the ship, taking notes for my article, snapping photos of the infinity pools and glass-bottomed observation decks. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect, maybe. There was something about the place that felt, I don't know, sterile. Like one of those luxury apartments nobody actually lives in. The first night passed without incident. I had dinner at one of the specialty restaurants, took in a show at the theater, gambled a bit in the casino, normal cruise stuff. I remember chatting with an older couple from Seattle and a family from Australia. Everyone was having a great time, raving about how incredible the ship was. If only we'd known what was coming. It was the second night when things started to get weird. I'd gone to bed around 11 after finishing some notes for my article. I must have fallen asleep quickly because the next thing I knew, I was jolting awake at 2:17 a.m. I remember the time clearly because I checked my phone, wondering what had woken me. That's when I felt it, a cold spot in the room. Not just cool, but bone-deep cold, like someone had opened a window to Antarctica. Except we were in the middle of the Caribbean in July. I sat up thinking maybe the AC was malfunctioning, but the cold seemed to be concentrated at the foot of my bed. Then I heard them, voices in the hallway outside my room. Not loud or alarming, just hushed, whispering, like people trying not to be heard. I thought maybe it was just other passengers returning late from the bars, but something about those whispers made my skin crawl. They didn't sound right. There was a hollow quality to them, like they were coming through water or from very far away. I got up and pressed my ear to the door. The voices were clearer now, but I still couldn't make out what they were saying. It sounded almost like a different language, but not quite. More like English that had been twisted somehow. I opened my door just a crack and peeked out. The hallway was empty, completely empty. But the whispers were still there, seeming to come from further down the corridor. I don't know what possessed me to follow them. Professional curiosity, maybe. God, I wish I'd just gone back to bed. I stepped into the hallway wearing just my pajamas and slippers. The carpet was plush under my feet, but the air was freezing cold, much colder than it had been during the day. The whispers led me toward the aft section of the ship, past rows of identical white doors. When I reached the end of the hallway, I found something that hadn't been on any of the ship maps they'd given us at check-in. A door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" in bold red letters. The rational part of my brain said to turn around, but the whispers were louder now, more urgent, and coming from behind that door. I tried the handle, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. The door opened to reveal a narrow stairwell going down, way down. The stairs were metal, industrial, nothing like the luxurious design of the passenger areas. The lighting was dim, just bare bulbs spaced along the walls. And it was cold, so cold I could see my breath. I should have gone back, I should have called security, but something pulled me forward, down those stairs. 1 flight, 2, 3. I lost count. The further down I went, the older the surroundings seemed to get. The gleaming metal gave way to rusted pipes and peeling paint. The stairwell shouldn't have been that deep. We couldn't have been that far below the waterline, but it kept going. Finally, I reached the bottom. Another door, this one heavy and metal with a wheel lock like you'd see in old submarine movies. The whispers were coming from behind it, clearer now. "Help us. Please. We're trapped." I turned the wheel with trembling hands. The room beyond was dark, lit only by the red glow of emergency lights. It was filled with maritime equipment, old radios, navigation tools, charts spread across tables. But it wasn't. The equipment that made my blood run cold, it was the ship logs. Open on one of the tables was a leather-bound book that looked decades old. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting faded, but I could still read the entries. They documented disappearances, passengers and crew members who had vanished without explanation, dozens of them. But that was impossible. The Elysium was on its maiden voyage. How could there be historical records of people disappearing on it? Then I saw the photograph. Pinned to one of the charts was a Polaroid of a man I recognized, an elderly gentleman I'd seen at dinner the first night, dining alone. According to the caption scrawled beneath the photo, he had joined the others just hours earlier. I hadn't seen him at all that day. That's when I felt the presence behind me. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would find. An old man stood there, but not the one from the photo. This man wore what looked like an officer's uniform, but it was tattered and wet, as if he'd been pulled from the ocean. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes... God, his eyes were like looking into empty space. "We need your help," he said, his voice carrying that same underwater quality I'd heard in the whispers. "We are trapped, all of us." I ran. I don't remember much about getting back to my room, just the pounding of my heart and the feeling that something was right behind me, reaching for me with cold, wet hands. I locked my door and pushed a chair against it, then huddled in my bed until morning, too terrified to even call for help. When daylight finally came, I convinced myself I'd had some kind of nightmare or hallucination. Maybe someone had slipped something into my drink at dinner. Maybe it was just stress. I took a long shower, got dressed, and decided to get some breakfast, hoping food and coffee would clear my head. But the dining room was buzzing with concerned conversations. People were missing, not just the old man from the photograph, but others. A young honeymooning couple, a child, 2 crew members. The ship's officers were trying to keep everyone calm, saying they were conducting a thorough search, that the missing passengers had probably just lost track of time exploring the massive ship. I knew better. I spent the morning discreetly asking questions, gathering information. Other passengers had heard the whispers too. A woman on deck 12 said she'd seen a little girl in an old-fashioned dress walking through a wall. A bartender confided that the kitchen staff were refusing to work alone in the storage areas because of strange sounds. That afternoon, I did something risky. I snuck into the ship's administrative office while the staff was busy dealing with the growing panic. I found what I was looking for in a locked file cabinet, the complete historical records of the MS Elysium. What I read made my blood run cold. The Elysium hadn't been built from scratch as the company claimed. Its hull, its bones, had been salvaged from a vessel called the SS Orpheus that had disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle in 1975. The Orpheus itself had been built using materials from an even older ship, the HMS Revenant, which had vanished in the same waters in 1928. The pattern went back centuries, ships disappearing, their remains recovered years later, then repurposed into new vessels that suffered the same fate. According to the files, the company knew about this history. They knew, but they built the Elysium anyway, thinking that modern technology would somehow break the curse. Instead, they'd created something worse, a vessel that contained the trapped souls of everyone who had ever disappeared on its predecessor ships, a floating prison for the damned. I was still processing this horrifying information when the lights flickered. The ship's engines, which had been a constant background hum, suddenly went silent. Emergency alarms began to wail. I made my way back to the main deck to find chaos. The ship was dead in the water. Backup generators had kicked in, but most systems were offline, and the disappearances were accelerating. People were vanishing right before others' eyes, there one moment and gone the next. Panic was spreading like wildfire. That's when they started appearing. The ghosts, spirits, whatever you want to call them. They materialized throughout the ship, men, women, and children from different eras, all with that same pallid, waterlogged appearance. They moved among the terrified passengers, their voices rising from whispers to wails. "Join us," they cried. "You're already part of the ship. You've always been part of the ship." I saw the elderly officer again. He approached me directly, water streaming from his uniform. "You know the truth now," he said. "The Elysium isn't just a ship. It's a vessel for souls. For centuries, we've been collecting them from the Triangle. Now you're all part of us." I ran again, this time to the communications center. The regular systems were down, but I found an emergency radio still functioning. I managed to send out a distress call, giving our coordinates and begging for immediate evacuation. Whether anyone heard me, I couldn't be sure. The next hours were a nightmare. The ship began to transform before our eyes. The gleaming white surfaces turned dull and rusted. Seawater began seeping through the walls, though we weren't sinking. More and more passengers disappeared while the number of ghostly figures increased. They were taking over, replacing us one by one. A Coast Guard cutter found us the next morning. By then, half the passengers and crew were gone. The Elysium was towed back to Miami like a derelict, its systems dead, its luxurious features decayed as if they'd been exposed to decades of neglect. The official explanation was mass hallucination caused by a gas leak. The missing passengers? No official comment. The cruise line filed for bankruptcy a week later. The Elysium sits in a secured dock now, abandoned. Nobody wants to go near it, but I know the truth. That ship isn't empty. It's full of souls. Souls that have been trapped there for centuries, bound to the cursed materials that make up its hull. And sometimes, at night, I still hear them whispering to me, calling me back. Because once you've been on the Elysium, you're never really free of it. Part of you stays behind, trapped in that floating purgatory forever. I haven't told anyone else what I found in those files. Who would believe me? But I needed to write it down, to share it somehow. So if you're reading this and you get an amazing deal on a cruise, especially one offering a revolutionary new ship, do yourself a favor. Stay on dry land. Some vessels are designed to carry more than just passengers. Story 12. I've always considered myself a pretty experienced outdoorsman. I've done dozens of solo camping trips over the years without any issues. Just me, my gear, and the wilderness. It was always my way to reset when work and life got too overwhelming. But what happened last month in the forests north of Pine Creek has completely changed me. I haven't told many people about this, but I need to get it off my chest. I'd been working insane hours at the office for months, 12-hour days, weekends, the whole nightmare. By mid-April, I was at my breaking point. I needed to get away, and not to some tourist-packed campground. I wanted real solitude. I found this spot on an old forestry map. No facilities, no designated campsite, just a small clearing near a lake about an hour's hike from the nearest access road. Perfect. I took Friday off work, packed my truck with supplies, and hit the road early. The drive up to Pine Creek was uneventful. I parked at this little gravel pullout where the hiking trail began around 2 in the afternoon. The weather was cool but clear, ideal camping weather. I shouldered my pack and started down the narrow trail. The hike-in was gorgeous. The forest was dense with these massive old pines, and the ground was soft with years of fallen needles. Everything smelled damp and earthy. I remember feeling this wave of relief as I got deeper into the woods, like I could finally breathe again after being suffocated for months. I took my time, stopping to drink water and just enjoy the silence. I reached the clearing around 4. It was smaller than I expected, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by those huge pines. The small lake, more like a large pond really, was about 50 yards away, visible through a break in the trees. The water looked almost black in the shadows. I set up camp, pitched my tent facing the lake, and gathered firewood for the night. Then I cooked a simple dinner, just some freeze-dried pasta I'd brought along. By the time I finished eating, the sun was starting to set. That's when I first noticed something odd. The forest had gone completely silent, not the peaceful quiet you normally experience, but an absolute stillness that felt wrong. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of leaves rustling. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that's not normal, but I brushed it off. Weather changes, animals being spooked by my presence, whatever. I got a decent fire going as darkness fell, but I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. You know that prickly sensation on the back of your neck? It was like that, but from all directions at once. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line, but couldn't see anything unusual in the growing darkness. I turned in around 10, exhausted from the hike and hoping for a good night's sleep. That didn't happen. I dozed off quickly enough but woke up maybe 2 hours later to the sound of something moving outside. It was subtle at first, just twigs snapping and leaves rustling. Could be anything, right? A raccoon, maybe a deer. But then it got closer to my tent and the movement seemed deliberate, slow, careful. At one point, something brushed against the side of my tent, not hard, just a light touch that made the fabric ripple. I froze, hardly breathing, clutching my pocket knife under my sleeping bag. Whatever it was circled my tent once, then seemed to move away. I didn't sleep again until I saw light filtering through the tent fabric. Morning came gray and misty. I was exhausted, but told myself it was probably just an animal curious about the tent. After coffee and a protein bar, I decided to explore a bit, walking the perimeter of the lake. The ground was soft, and I noticed some footprints in the mud near the water. Old ones, not fresh, and definitely human, probably from hikers weeks ago. Still, it was unsettling to think others knew about this supposedly secret spot. By midday, the weather had started to turn. The sky darkened, and the air felt heavy with the threat of rain. I spent some time reinforcing my tent stakes and covering my gear with a tarp. While doing this, I spotted something disturbing about 50 feet from my campsite, an area where the ground had been freshly disturbed. The soil was loosened, with what looked like claw marks raking through it. My first thought was bear, which wasn't comforting at all. I hadn't brought a bear canister, just hung my food from a tree branch. I spent the rest of the day on edge, constantly scanning the tree line. I found myself gathering more wood than necessary, building up my fire bigger than I needed. As darkness approached again, that unnatural silence returned. Even the sound of the fire crackling seemed muted somehow. That second night was when things got truly terrifying. I tried to sleep around 10 again, but was wide awake, listening to every sound. Around midnight, I heard it. Footsteps. Not the random movement of an animal, but deliberate steps, crunching on pine needles, circling my campsite. Whatever it was made a complete circuit around my tent twice. The steps were heavy, but spaced like a human's. Then they stopped, directly in front of my tent door. I sat there in the dark, knife in hand, barely breathing. There was no sound of breathing outside, no movement, nothing, just the sense of something standing there waiting. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe minutes, maybe hours. I was too terrified to check my watch or reach for my flashlight. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep from pure exhaustion. When I woke up, the early morning light was filtering through my tent. I waited, listening carefully before unzipping the door. The campsite looked undisturbed at first glance. No footprints that I could see on the hard ground. But then I noticed one of the branches from my neatly stacked firewood pile had been snapped cleanly in half. Not like an animal had chewed it or a falling branch had broken it. It was like someone had deliberately stepped on it, breaking it in the middle. That was it. I was done. I didn't care about my planned 3-day trip anymore. I started packing up immediately, throwing things into my backpack without my usual organization. The whole time, I felt like I was being observed from just beyond the tree line. Every few seconds I'd whip around, certain I'd catch something watching me, but there was never anything there. By 7 that morning, I was on the trail heading back to my truck. The path seemed longer than I remembered, narrower somehow. Every sound made me jump. A squirrel running up a tree nearly gave me a heart attack. About an hour into the hike, I found something that made my blood run cold. Fresh footprints on a muddy section of the trail. They were large, bigger than my own boots, and they weren't animal tracks. They looked like bare human feet, but oddly shaped, with toes that seemed too long, and they were heading in my direction, toward the campsite I'd just left. I picked up my pace, nearly jogging now despite my heavy pack. At one point I heard what sounded like breathing, low and raspy, just off the path to my right. I didn't stop to look. Whatever it was seemed to parallel my path for about a quarter mile before the sound suddenly disappeared. When I finally spotted my truck through the trees, I nearly cried with relief. But even as I approached the parking area, I felt this strange pressure. Not exactly eyes on me, but something else. It felt like the woods themselves were conscious, aware of me leaving, telling me not to come back. I threw my gear in the truck and drove home without stopping once. The whole way back, I tried to rationalize what had happened. It was just an animal, probably a bear. The footprints could have been from another hiker. The breathing was just wind in the trees. But deep down, I knew better. It's been 3 weeks now. I haven't been hiking since, not even on the popular trails near town that I used to run every weekend. My camping gear is still in the garage, untouched. My friends have suggested trying different areas, saying maybe I just had a bad experience with some local wildlife. They don't understand. What I felt out there wasn't fear of being attacked or hurt. It was the fear of being known by something that didn't want to be seen, something that watches from the trees and waits. I check the locks on my doors twice every night now. Sometimes I wake up at exactly midnight, feeling that same presence outside my bedroom window. And when the wind blows through the trees in my backyard, I swear I can hear those same careful, deliberate footsteps circling my house. Story 13. I've been driving trucks for almost 27 years now, coast to coast, north to south. I've seen just about everything the highways of America have to offer. Weird shit happens on the road when you're alone at night. That's just part of the job. But what happened to me last month on Route 66 in New Mexico, I still can't explain it. I'm writing this down partly to get it off my chest, and partly because I need to know if anyone else has seen what I saw. It was a Thursday night, or I guess technically Friday morning, since it was after midnight. I was hauling a load of electronics from Albuquerque to Amarillo, running behind schedule because of some bullshit with the loading dock. My dispatcher was breathing down my neck about delivery times, so I decided to push through instead of stopping for the night like I should have. The stretch of Route 66. I was on cuts through some of the emptiest country you can imagine, just miles of darkness on either side of the road, with the occasional sad little town that's more ghost than anything else. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show about conspiracy theories that I wasn't really listening to, and I was chewing sunflower seeds to stay alert. My third coffee of the night was getting cold in the cup holder. It was around 1:30 in the morning when I first noticed something. At first, it was just a dark shape that darted across the road maybe 100 yards ahead. I instinctively tapped the brakes, thinking it might be a coyote or maybe a deer. Nothing unusual about that. Wildlife crossing the road happens all the time. But then I realized how big it was. Too big for a coyote, wrong shape for a deer. I figured it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. I'd been on the road for almost 14 hours at that point, and fatigue can make you see all kinds of shit. I cranked up the AC a bit to help keep me awake and kept driving. About 10 minutes later, I saw it again. This time it was on the right shoulder of the road, and I got a better look as my headlights swept across it. It was a dog, or at least it looked like a dog, but it was massive. I'm talking way bigger than any dog has any right to be, like the size of a small pony or something. And it was the blackest black I've ever seen, like it was made out of the darkness itself. But what really got me were its eyes. They caught the light from my high beams, but instead of the usual animal eye shine, they glowed this deep, burning red-orange, like embers in a dying fire, and they were fixed right on me as I drove past. I'm not a superstitious man, but something about those eyes made my skin crawl. I remember thinking, that ain't right, and pressing a little harder on the gas. The speedometer crept up to 65. That should have been the end of it. Whatever that thing was should have disappeared behind me. But when I checked my side mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The dog was running alongside my truck, keeping pace, at 65 miles per hour. No animal moves like that. Nothing natural anyway. I blinked hard and looked again, sure I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But it was still there, running with this weird fluid grace that didn't make any sense. Its paws barely seemed to touch the ground, and it was looking at me. Not just in my general direction, it was making direct eye contact with me through the mirror. There was intelligence in those eyes. Not animal intelligence, something else, something that knew me. I'm not proud to admit it, but I panicked a little. I pushed my rig up to 70, then 75. The road was empty, and I just wanted to put some distance between me and whatever the hell that thing was. But every time I checked my mirror, it was still there, keeping pace without any apparent effort, just loping along like we were out for a casual jog instead of tearing down the highway at speeds that would tear a normal animal's legs off. After about 5 miles of this, I spotted the lights of a truck stop coming up on the right. I decided I needed to stop to get out of the truck for a minute, clear my head, maybe get another coffee and splash some water on my face. I signaled and pulled off the highway. The truck stop was one of those old run-down places that looks like it hasn't been updated since the 70s. There were only 2 other trucks in the lot, both dark and quiet. The convenience store part was closed, just a vending machine outside and bathrooms that you needed a key for, not a soul in sight. I pulled into a spot far from the other trucks and shut off the engine. When I checked all my mirrors, there was no sign of the dog. I sat there for a few minutes, just breathing, telling myself I'd been seeing things. Maybe I'd even dozed off for a second while driving. It happens to the best of us, though we don't like to admit it. Finally, I decided to get out and stretch my legs. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, locked the truck, force of habit, even in the middle of nowhere, and headed to the bathroom. I took my time, splashed cold water on my face, and even walked around the parking lot a bit to get my blood flowing. The whole time, I was looking around for any sign of a large black dog, but there was nothing. Just the empty parking lot, the silent highway, and the vast New Mexico desert stretching out into darkness. After about 15 minutes, I felt better, more awake, more rational. I decided the dog had been a hallucination brought on by fatigue, or maybe just a regular animal that my tired brain had transformed into something more sinister. Either way, I needed to get back on the road. I climbed back into my truck, settled into my seat, and reached for the key. That's when I noticed it. On the passenger seat, which had been empty when I left, was a tuft of black fur. Not a lot, just a small clump, like what might come off when a dog sheds. I reached over and picked it up. It was coarse but oddly warm, like it had just been pulled from a living animal. and it was that same unnatural black, so dark it seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight. My truck had been locked. All the windows were up. There was no way anything could have gotten in, but something had. I dropped the fur like it had burned me and fumbled for my keys, suddenly desperate to get moving again. As I was about to start the engine, I glanced out my driver's side window. It was standing there, not 10 feet away from my truck. The dog, staring at me with those burning eyes. In the harsh yellow light of the truck stop, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was even bigger than I'd thought. Its shoulder would have easily reached my chest if I'd been standing next to it. Its fur was so black it looked like a hole cut out of reality. And those eyes, they weren't just reflecting light. They were generating it, glowing from within with that ember-like orange red. But the worst part was its face. It was smiling. I swear to God, that dog had a smile that was almost human, pulling back to reveal teeth that were too long, too sharp for any normal canine. I jammed the key in the ignition and turned it, but the engine just made that awful grinding noise because I was turning too hard, too fast. The dog took a step toward my truck, then another. Come on, I muttered, forcing myself to turn the key more gently. The engine caught, and I almost sobbed with relief. The dog broke into a run, heading straight for my door. I threw the truck into gear, but before I could pull away, it hit the side of my cab with enough force to rock the entire truck. The impact was like getting T-boned by a car, not an animal. I heard a horrible screeching sound as claws raked across the metal of my door. I floored it, tires spinning on the loose gravel before catching. As I pulled away, the dog jumped up, slamming its front paws against my window. For one terrible second, its face was right there, inches from mine, separated only by the glass. It wasn't just smiling anymore. It was snarling, mouth open wide enough to show a throat that seemed to go down forever, like looking into an abyss. I shot out of that parking lot like a bat out of hell, fishtailing onto the highway. I drove flat out for the next 20 miles, heart hammering in my chest, refusing to look in my mirrors. I was convinced that if I looked back, I'd see it running behind me again, those eyes burning into me. Eventually, I had to slow down. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel, and I was afraid I was going to wreck. I pulled over to the side of the road, put on my hazards, and just sat there trying to catch my breath. The eastern sky was starting to lighten a bit. Not dawn yet, but getting there. After sitting for maybe 10 minutes, I finally worked up the courage to get out and check my truck. What I saw made my stomach drop. Down the driver's side of my rig were 4 parallel gouges in the metal, deep enough to expose the primer underneath the paint. They started at the door and ran almost the entire length of the cab, like whatever made them had been dragging its claws along the side as I drove away. These weren't old marks. They weren't there when I started my trip. And they weren't the kind of damage that happens from road debris or tree branches. They were claw marks, fresh ones. I took some pictures with my phone, my hands still shaking. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I got back in my truck and drove the rest of the way to Amarillo with all the lights on and the radio blasting. I made my delivery, but I called my dispatcher and told him I needed a few days off. He could tell from my voice that something was wrong, so he didn't give me any grief about it. It's been almost 4 weeks now, and I'm back on the road. I've got a different route. I made sure of that. I haven't seen the dog again, but I dream about it almost every night. Those eyes, that smile. I've asked around casually if any other drivers have seen a big black dog out on Route 66. Most laugh it off. A few get quiet, then change the subject. One old-timer, though, he just stared at me for a long time before saying, "You saw the black dog, did you? Better count your blessings you're still here to talk about it." He wouldn't say anything more. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know how it got into my locked truck, or how it could run as fast as it did, or how it could smile at me with that almost human face. All I know is that I won't be driving Route 66 after midnight again. And sometimes, when I'm on a dark stretch of highway and I check my mirrors, I catch myself looking for a pair of glowing ember eyes in the darkness behind me, because I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting, watching. And I can't shake the feeling that someday I'm going to see it again. Story 14. I've been staring at this blank page for an hour now, trying to figure out how to even start. My hands are shaking just thinking about it again. It's been 5 months since it happened, but every time I close my eyes, I can still see her face. That woman with the vacant stare, pointing our own gun at my husband while her partner was trying to... God, I still can't bring myself to finish that thought. Marcus and I used to live for our hiking trips. We met on the Appalachian Trail 7 years ago, both solo hikers who kept running into each other at different shelters. By the third shelter, we were hiking together, and we've been together ever since. We've done sections of the AT, parts of the Pacific Crest, and countless weekend trails. The forest was our second home. When I got pregnant with Leah, we obviously had to take a break. The pregnancy was tough, and the first year with a baby was even tougher. But as Leah approached her first birthday, we were both itching to get back out there. Not the intense multi-week hikes we used to do, but something to remind us of who we were before we became parents. We settled on the Roan Highlands section, a beautiful week-long trail that we'd done parts of before, remote enough to avoid the crowds, but well-marked enough that we felt comfortable bringing Leah. We spent weeks planning, bought a special carrier for her, tested all our gear. Marcus even decided to bring his pistol, something we'd never done before, but having Leah changed our perspective on safety. The first 2 days were perfect. Leah was loving it, giggling at birds, fascinated by the light filtering through leaves. We'd forgotten how good it felt to be out there, away from screens and noise. The weather was ideal, mild for early June, and we were making good progress. We first spotted them on the afternoon of the second day, a woman with wild red curly hair wearing this dirty straw hat that looked like it had been run over multiple times, and a man, tall, unnaturally skinny with this patchy beard and eyes that seemed to be constantly darting around. They were about 50 yards ahead on the trail, just standing there. Not hiking, not resting, just waiting. As we approached, they smiled, but something was off about it. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. They were empty, almost glazed over. The man kept looking at Leah in her carrier on Marcus's back. "Beautiful baby," the woman said. Her voice was higher pitched than I expected. "How old?" "Just turned 1, I answered, trying to be polite but already feeling uncomfortable. "Girl or boy?" the man asked. Something about his voice made my skin crawl. It was flat, emotionless. "Girl," Marcus replied curtly. I could tell he sensed the weirdness too. "What's her name?" the woman pressed, stepping closer. Her clothes smelled musty, like they hadn't been washed in months. I hesitated before answering. "Leah." "Leah," she repeated, drawing out the name. "Pretty. Can I hold her?" She actually reached toward Marcus's back. I instinctively stepped between them. "Sorry, she's been fussy with strangers lately." The man laughed, a sharp, abrupt sound. "Kids need to get used to strangers. Builds character." We made some excuse about needing to make miles before dark and quickly moved past them. As we walked away, I glanced back. They were both still standing there, watching us. Not moving, not talking to each other, just staring. "That was weird, right?" I whispered to Marcus once we were out of earshot. "Definitely weird," he agreed. "But you know how some long-distance hikers can get. Living in the woods for months makes people eccentric." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Their gear didn't look like long-distance hikers. They barely had any visible equipment, no trekking poles, no visible water bottles. Where had they even come from? We hadn't passed any connecting trails. We hiked until dusk, setting up camp in a small clearing about 20 yards off the main trail. Marcus built a fire while I fed Leah and got her ready for bed. Our tent was spacious enough for the 3 of us, with Leah sleeping between us. Despite my lingering unease about the strange couple, the familiar routine of making camp calmed me. We sat by the fire, talking quietly as Leah slept in the tent. "Do you think we'll see them again?" I asked Marcus, poking at the fire with a stick. He shrugged. "Doubt it. They were probably day hikers or staying at one of the shelters." I nodded, trying to convince myself he was right. We turned in early, exhausted from the day's hike. I fell asleep to the sound of Marcus's steady breathing and Leah's tiny snores. The night passed uneventfully. I woke once to feed Leah, then drifted back to sleep until dawn. When I unzipped the tent in the morning, everything looked normal at first. The clearing was peaceful, birds singing, dew glistening on the grass. But as I walked to our bear bag to retrieve our breakfast, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints, multiple sets, circling our tent. They hadn't been there the night before, I was certain of it. "Marcus," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come look at this." He joined me, Leah in his arms, and immediately saw what had me spooked. "Maybe animals," he suggested, but we both knew better. These were clearly human footprints. Then I noticed something else. I rushed back to our cooking gear. Leah's stuff is gone. Her bottle, her little plastic plate and spoon, even the small stuffed bunny we'd brought for her, all missing. Our food was untouched in the bear bag, our expensive gear left alone. But everything that belonged specifically to Leah had vanished. Marcus's face hardened. "We're leaving. Now." We packed up in record time, barely speaking. The cheerful mood of the previous days was gone, replaced by a tense vigilance. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the bushes made me jump. Leah, sensing our anxiety, was unusually quiet. We checked the map. We were 3 days in, but only 2 days from the trailhead if we pushed hard. We could make it out tomorrow, but it would mean one more night in the forest. The thought made my stomach turn. "We can't hike out before dark," Marcus said, checking his watch. "Too many miles, especially with Leah." "So we camp one more night," I said, hating how my voice trembled. "One more night," he agreed. "We'll take shifts keeping watch." We hiked relentlessly that day, stopping only when necessary for Leah. By late afternoon, we'd covered an impressive distance. We found a campsite near a stream, more exposed than we'd normally choose, but the openness meant better visibility. As darkness fell, the forest seemed to close in around us. Every shadow looked threatening, every sound sinister. We ate a cold dinner, not wanting to draw attention with a fire. I took the first watch while Marcus slept with Leah in the tent. Sitting outside in the darkness, my senses were on high alert. The pistol felt heavy in my hand. I'd never actually fired it before. Marcus had shown me how, but the thought of actually needing to use it made me sick. Around midnight, I heard it. Soft footsteps, deliberately placed. Someone trying not to be heard. My heart hammered so hard I was sure it would give me away. I crawled to the tent, waking Marcus with a hand over his mouth. "Someone's out there," I whispered. He was instantly alert. He took the gun from me. "Stay with Leah. Don't come out unless I call you." I watched through the mesh window as Marcus moved cautiously into the darkness, pistol raised. "I know you're out there," he called. "We're armed. Leave us alone." Silence. "We've already radioed the rangers about you," he lied. "They know we're here. They know about you." More silence. After what felt like hours, Marcus returned to the tent. "I don't see anyone. Could have been an animal." But we both knew it wasn't. Marcus took over the watch. I curled around Leah in the tent, listening to her soft breathing, feeling her warm little body against mine. I must have eventually drifted off despite my fear. I woke to screaming, my own screaming. The tent door was open and there she was, the red-haired woman, pointing our pistol at Marcus, who was on his knees a few feet away. Behind me, I felt movement. The tall man was halfway inside our tent, reaching toward Leah. Everything happened so fast. Marcus lunged for the fire pit, grabbing a handful of cold ashes and throwing them in the woman's face. She fired, but the shot went wild. Marcus tackled her, knocking the gun from her hand. I grabbed Leah and scrambled to the far corner of the tent, kicking at the man who was still trying to get in. Marcus retrieved the gun, pointing it at the man. "Get out," he growled. "Get the fuck away from my family." The woman was wiping ash from her eyes, that empty gaze now filled with something worse. Rage. The man backed away slowly, then both of them disappeared into the darkness. We didn't wait. We packed only what we absolutely needed and hiked through the night, Marcus carrying Leah, me with the pistol. We reached the car just as dawn was breaking, drove straight to the nearest police station. The officers took our report, sent rangers to search the area. They found our abandoned gear, but no sign of the couple. No fingerprints, no evidence anyone else had been there at all. One officer even had the nerve to suggest we might have imagined it all. Stress, new parents, alone in the woods. But we didn't imagine it. And just 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a detective, another family, another trail about 30 miles from where we were. Same description, red-haired woman, tall, skinny man. They asked about a baby too. We don't hike anymore. I can't even walk in the local park without feeling watched. Marcus says time will heal this, that eventually we'll feel safe again, but I don't believe him. Because sometimes when I look out our bedroom window at night, I swear I see her watching from the tree line. That dirty straw hat, those empty eyes, waiting. And I keep wondering, what would have happened if Marcus hadn't woken up? What did they want with our daughter? Some questions are better left unanswered. But I know one thing for certain. There are monsters in this world, and they don't have fangs or claws. They have empty eyes and patient smiles, and they're still out there. Story 15. Augustin, I still can't sleep properly. It's been 3 weeks since that night on I-80, and every time I close my eyes, I see those empty cabs, those dim lights trailing through the darkness. I've been driving big rigs for 22 years, and nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever shaken me like this. I'm not posting this for attention or because I think anyone can explain what happened. I just need to get this off my chest before it eats me alive. Maybe someone else has seen what I saw. Maybe I'm not going crazy after all. It was late November, just before Thanksgiving. I was making my regular Denver to San Francisco run, a route I've done hundreds of times. The weather was clear but cold as hell, with that biting winter chill that makes the cab feel like an icebox, even with the heater cranked. I'd left Denver around noon, planning to make it to Elko, Nevada before stopping for the night. The sun had set around 5, and by 9 that evening, I was cruising along I-80 somewhere west of Salt Lake City. That stretch of highway gets so damn empty at night, just miles of darkness with the occasional set of headlights passing in the opposite direction. The isolation never bothered me before. Actually, I used to love it. Just me, my thoughts, and the rumble of my Peterbilt cutting through the night. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show about alien conspiracies or something. I wasn't really listening. My thermos of coffee was nearly empty, and I was calculating whether I needed to stop soon or could push through another hour to make better time. The monotony of the highway had me in that zone all truckers know, alert but relaxed, hypnotized by the white lines and reflectors streaming past. That's when I first noticed them in my side mirror. Headlights, way back, moving slower than normal highway speed. I didn't think much of it at first, probably just another trucker taking it easy or someone hauling an oversized load. But something about those lights bothered me. They were dim, yellowed, not the bright halogens most trucks run these days, and they were perfectly spaced, like a convoy moving in perfect formation. As I watched, I counted at least 7 sets of headlights, all maintaining the exact same distance from each other. No variation at all. In 20-plus years of driving, I've never seen trucks maintain such perfect spacing, especially at night on a deserted stretch of highway. I eased off the accelerator, curious. My speedometer dropped from 70 to 65, then 60. The convoy behind me didn't speed up or slow down. They just maintained that eerie, steady pace. I figured they'd catch up to me eventually at the rate I was slowing, but they seemed to be holding at exactly 50 miles per hour, not 49 or 51. Exactly 50. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. I can't explain why, but something felt wrong. Really wrong. Maybe it was the unnatural precision of their movement, or maybe it was just my exhausted mind playing tricks. But a voice in my head was screaming at me to speed up and put distance between us. Instead, I did something I still can't explain. I slowed down more, all the way to 50, matching their speed. I told myself I was just being cautious, but honestly, I was drawn to them like a moth to a flame. It was like I had to know what was behind me. For a few minutes, we all moved along the empty highway like that, me in the right lane, this strange convoy gradually gaining on me in the same lane. When the first truck was about 50 yards behind me, I hit my turn signal and pulled into the left lane to let them pass. As the first truck drew even with me, I glanced over, expecting to see another driver, maybe give a friendly nod or wave like we do. What I saw instead turned my blood to ice. The cab was empty. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating from fatigue. I looked again. The interior light wasn't on, but in the glow from my own cab and the dashboard lights, I could clearly see there was no one behind the wheel, no one in the passenger seat, no one in the sleeper, just an empty truck, somehow maintaining a perfect line and speed on the highway. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was wide awake now, heart hammering against my ribs. As that first truck passed me, I noticed something else that sent another jolt of fear through me. The truck was old, and I don't mean a few years old. I mean it looked like something from the 70s, with a boxy design they don't make anymore. The paint was dull and peeling in places, with rust eating at the corners. The trailer it pulled was equally aged, with faded lettering I couldn't make out. No truck in that condition should have been on the road. The DOT would have pulled it off in a heartbeat. Yet here it was, ghosting past me at a perfect 50 miles per hour, driving itself down I-80. I should have floored it right then, should have called highway patrol, should have done anything except what I did, which was continue driving alongside this impossible convoy, watching each truck pass me one by one. The second truck was similar, another ancient model that belonged in a junkyard, not on an interstate highway. Its cab was empty too. So was the third and the fourth. Each one looked worse than the last. Cracked windshields, missing panels, headlights that seemed to be glowing with a light that wasn't quite electric. More like the pale luminescence of foxfire on rotting wood. By the time the fifth truck pulled alongside me, I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. This one was different. A tanker with hazard placards so faded I couldn't read the warnings. For a split second I thought I saw movement in the cab, a shadow shifting behind the wheel. But when I looked directly, there was nothing there. Just darkness and the faint glow of dead instruments. The sixth truck was a flatbed carrying nothing. Its frame was so rusted through in places that I could see straight through to the other side. Physics said it should have collapsed under its own weight, yet it rolled steadily forward, its wheels barely seeming to touch the asphalt. The last truck, the one leading this nightmare parade, was the worst. It was a government-style vehicle, like the kind used by military convoys in the 50s or 60s. Its license plate wasn't a standard issue. It had strange lettering I've never seen on any American plate. As it passed me, the air around my truck seemed to grow colder, so cold that my breath fogged inside the cab despite the heater running full blast. I couldn't take my eyes off that lead truck. Something about it radiated a presence that was more than just metal and machinery. It felt aware. As it pulled ahead of me, I could have sworn I heard a sound cutting through the normal road noise, a low droning hum that made my fillings ache and set my nerves on edge. When the last truck had passed me, I stayed in the left lane, maintaining my speed but keeping my distance. The convoy stretched out ahead of me, those dim taillights forming a line that seemed to disappear into infinity, though I knew I'd counted only 7 trucks. I don't know what possessed me, but I gradually increased my speed. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that these were just normal trucks after all, that there was a rational explanation. I pushed my rig up to 60, then 70, watching as I slowly gained on the last truck in the line. As I approached it from behind, the strangest thing happened. The truck, which had been solid enough as it passed me, now seemed to waver slightly, like heat rising off asphalt in summer. Its outline blurred at the edges. Its taillights dimmed further until they were barely visible. I blinked and suddenly the gap between me and that last truck had widened again. I hadn't slowed down, but somehow the distance had stretched. I pushed my accelerator further, determined now to catch up, to confirm what I was seeing. My speedometer hit 80, dangerous for a fully loaded rig, but I wasn't thinking clearly. The convoy maintained that perfect 50-mile-per-hour pace, yet no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't seem to close the distance. It was like they were just beyond reach, pulling away without accelerating. I must have driven like that for 10 minutes, pushing my truck harder than I should have, chasing those fading taillights. Then I topped a gentle rise in the highway, and the road ahead was empty, completely empty. The convoy had vanished. I slammed on my brakes, skidding slightly before regaining control. My rig shuddered to a halt on the empty highway, and I sat there, engine idling, staring at nothing but dark asphalt stretching to the horizon. There were no exits they could have taken, no side roads, no rest areas. Just the main highway, now completely deserted except for me. I checked my mirrors compulsively, certain they had somehow gotten behind me again. Nothing. I flipped on every light my truck had, illuminating the road around me like daylight. Nothing but empty road in every direction. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes trying to process what I'd just experienced. Finally, I convinced myself to keep driving. I needed to reach civilization, needed to be around normal people and normal vehicles. I drove way too fast after that, paranoid that whatever I'd seen would return. I blew past my planned stop in Elko and pushed all the way to a truck stop just outside Reno, pulling in around 3 in the morning. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my cab that night. I took a room at the motel next door, though I just sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall until dawn. When the truck stop diner opened at 5, I was the first customer. The waitress, an older woman named Maggie according to her name tag, took one look at me and poured coffee without asking. "Rough night?" she asked, setting the mug in front of me. I must have looked like hell. I hadn't slept, hadn't showered, and my hands still trembled slightly as I lifted the coffee. "You could say that," I replied. "Had a strange experience on I-80 coming in from Salt Lake." Something in Maggie's expression changed, a tightening around the eyes, a stillness that hadn't been there before. "What kind of experience?" she asked, her voice deliberately casual. I hesitated. I'm not the type to believe in the supernatural. I've always scoffed at ghost stories and urban legends, but what came out of my mouth surprised even me. I saw trucks with no drivers, a convoy of them, old trucks that shouldn't even run anymore. Maggie set down her coffee pot and slid into the booth across from me. The diner was empty except for us, the morning sun just beginning to light the windows. "The silent convoy," she said simply, like she was naming a regular customer. My skin prickled. "You've heard of them?" She nodded slowly. "Been working this stop for 17 years. You're not the first to see them, not by a long shot." She told me other drivers had reported similar sightings over the years, always on that same stretch of I-80, always late at night, always in the late fall or winter months. Some claimed they were the ghosts of truckers who had died on the road, their final hauls destined never to arrive. Others thought they were something darker, entities that weren't human and never had been, taking the form of trucks to lure in drivers who traveled alone at night. "Consider yourself lucky," Maggie said, her eyes deadly serious. "Some who see the convoy are never seen again. They just disappear. Their trucks found abandoned along the highway, engines still running." I finished my shift and delivered my load to San Francisco the next day. I called my dispatcher and told him I needed some time off. I've been home for 3 weeks now, trying to make sense of what happened. Trying to convince myself it was just exhaustion, just my mind playing tricks. But I know what I saw. And I know it saw me too. I'm going back on the road next week. The bills won't pay themselves, and trucking is all I know. But I've changed my route. I'm not driving I-80 at night anymore. Not ever again. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed trying to sleep, I swear I can hear the distant hum of those engines passing by my house, even though I live miles from any highway. And when I check the street outside my window, I half expect to see those dim, yellowed headlights coming for me, those empty cabs waiting to add me to their endless convoy. I don't know what they were, I don't know what they wanted, but I know they're out there, rolling silently through the darkness, waiting for lonely drivers on empty highways, and I can't shake the feeling that someday, no matter how careful I am, I'll round a bend and see those taillights waiting for me again. Story 16. I've been driving trucks for almost 23 years now. Big rigs, long hauls, coast to coast. I've seen pretty much everything you can imagine on America's highways. Accidents, wildlife, weird roadside attractions, you name it. But what happened to me last winter on Route 77 in Nebraska, I still can't explain it. I don't talk about it much. My wife thinks I dozed off and had a vivid dream. My buddies at the truck stop laugh it off as road fatigue. But I know what I saw. It was mid-January, just after New Year's. I was hauling industrial equipment from Houston to Bismarck. Pretty standard route for me. I'd done it dozens of times before. The weather forecast warned about a winter storm system moving through the Plains states. But that's nothing unusual for January. We truckers deal with bad weather all the time. I remember checking my phone around 4 in the afternoon as I crossed into Nebraska from Kansas. The sky was already turning that weird yellowish gray that means snow is coming. Temperature was dropping fast too. The dispatcher called to warn me about deteriorating conditions up north, but I figured I could make it to my planned stop in Valentine before things got too bad. Man, was I wrong. By 7 that evening, I was somewhere in north-central Nebraska on Route 77, and the storm hit like a freight train. 1 minute I could see a half-mile ahead, the next it was like someone had thrown a white blanket over my windshield. The wind was howling so loud it drowned out my radio, and snow was coming down sideways. My wipers could barely keep up. I'd slowed to maybe 30 miles per hour, and even that felt too fast. I remember gripping the wheels so tight my knuckles were white. My shoulders were hunched up to my ears from the tension. Every gust of wind pushed against my trailer, and I could feel the rig wanting to slide. The road had disappeared under several inches of snow, and I was basically following the faint tracks left by whoever had passed through earlier. That's when I first noticed the tail lights ahead of me. At first I was relieved. Another truck meant I wasn't alone out here, and I could follow their path through the snow. But something felt off about those lights. They were glowing too bright, almost like they were burning rather than just illuminated. And they weren't moving, not even a little bit. I figured maybe another trucker had pulled over to wait out the worst of the storm. Smart move, honestly. I probably should have done the same, but I had a delivery schedule to keep. As I got closer, I could make out that it was definitely another semi, parked right on the shoulder. No hazards flashing, just those unnaturally bright red taillights burning through the snow. I slowed down even more as I approached. The truck looked wrong. Even through the blizzard, I could tell it was an older model. Way older, like something from the 70s or 80s. The kind you don't really see on the road anymore except at truck shows. It was dark-colored, black or maybe dark blue, with some kind of faded design on the trailer that I couldn't make out. Now, I'm not the type to just pass by another trucker who might be in trouble. We look out for each other on the road, so I pulled over about 50 feet behind him, put on my hazards, and grabbed my heavy coat and flashlight. The moment I stepped out of my cab, I knew I'd made a mistake. The cold hit me like a physical force, stealing my breath away. The wind was so strong I had to lean into it just to stay upright. Snow pelted my face like tiny needles, and the howling sound. It wasn't just the wind. There was something else in it, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I should have gotten back in my truck right then. Every instinct was screaming at me to leave. But 20-plus years of trucking culture is hard to ignore. You don't leave one of your own stranded, so I trudged forward through snow that was already past my ankles. My flashlight beam bounced around wildly as I fought against the wind. When I finally reached the other truck, what I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. Up close, the vehicle was in terrible condition. The paint was peeling off in large patches, revealing rust underneath. The tires looked partially deflated. There were dents and scratches all over the cab like it had been through a demolition derby. But the taillights, they were pristine and glowing with that same unnatural brightness, despite the layer of snow covering everything else. I made my way to the driver's side door, my boots crunching through what sounded like broken glass. Looking down, I saw shattered headlight pieces scattered around. It looked like this truck had been in a serious accident, yet here it was, parked on Route 77 in the middle of nowhere. When I shined my flashlight into the cab, I saw someone inside. A man was slumped over the steering wheel. He wasn't moving, heart pounding. I knocked on the window. "Hey, you all right in there?" No response. I knocked harder. "Sir, do you need help?" The figure inside slowly straightened up. I remember feeling relief wash over me. At least he was alive. But that relief vanished instantly when he turned toward me. His face, God, I still see it in my nightmares. Gaunt doesn't begin to describe it. His skin was stretched tight over his skull, so pale it was almost translucent. His cheeks were sunken in and his lips were cracked and blue. But it was his eyes that made my blood turn to ice. They were completely empty, not just vacant or lifeless, but literally like black holes in his face. No whites, no iris, just emptiness. I stumbled backward, nearly falling in the snow. The door of his cab creaked open, and he began to climb out. His movements were all wrong, jerky and stiff, like a marionette being controlled by someone who didn't know how joints work. His head tilted at an impossible angle as he stared at me. I thought you might need help," I stammered, already backing away. "But I see you're good." He didn't speak. He just kept coming toward me with those awkward, unnatural movements. I could see more of him now. He was wearing an old-style trucker jacket, the kind with patches on the sleeves. It was torn in several places, and there were dark stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. His hands hung at his sides, fingers too long and bent at odd angles. That's when I realized what was so deeply wrong about him. He didn't look like a person anymore. He looked like something wearing a person's skin, something that didn't quite understand how humans are supposed to move or look. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, slipping and sliding through the snow back to my truck. I could feel him behind me, though I didn't dare look back. The wind seemed to carry whispers now, words I couldn't quite make out but that filled me with dread. I practically dove into my cab, slamming and locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I yanked the truck into gear, pulling back onto the road without even checking my mirrors. As I accelerated away, I finally looked in my side mirror. The figure was standing in the middle of the road, those black void eyes fixed on my truck. The old semi's taillights still burned bright red through the swirling snow, and then, impossibly, they started moving, following me, even though there was clearly no one in the driver's seat now. I floored it. I didn't care about the road conditions anymore. I just needed to get away. My speedometer crept up, 40, 50, 60 miles per hour on a snow-covered road in whiteout conditions. Completely reckless, but fear makes you do stupid things. After about 10 minutes of white-knuckle driving, I couldn't see the red taillights in my mirrors anymore. I kept going anyway, not slowing down until I reached Valentine, Nebraska, around 9:30 that night. I pulled into the first truck stop I saw and parked under the brightest lights I could find. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the truck stop restaurant drinking coffee until dawn, jumping at every sound. The waitress probably thought I was on something. When morning came and the storm had passed, I convinced myself I'd experienced some kind of hallucination from stress and exhaustion. Road hypnosis, maybe. It happens to truckers sometimes on long, monotonous stretches. I finished my delivery in Bismarck 2 days later. On my return trip, I deliberately routed through that same stretch of Route 77 in daylight. I even pulled over at approximately the same spot. There was nothing there. No abandoned truck, no skid marks, no broken glass, just empty road and snow-covered fields. I should have been relieved. Instead, it just made me more uneasy. I've tried researching accidents on that stretch of highway. I found records of a fatal crash in 1986 involving a truck matching the description of what I saw. The driver was decapitated when his rig collided with a stalled car during a blizzard. They never found the head, but that's probably just a coincidence, right? It's been almost 9 months now, and I've mostly convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Except for one thing, I've been back on that route several times since then, and twice, during bad weather, I've caught glimpses of those same distinctive red taillights in the distance. They disappear when I get closer, but I know what I saw. Last week I was at a truck stop in Wyoming and got talking with an older driver, just casual conversation, swapping road stories. Without prompting, he mentioned avoiding Route 77 during storms. When I asked why, he got real quiet, then just said, "Some trucks shouldn't be followed." I didn't press him for details. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what he meant. I've got another run to North Dakota next week. The weather forecast is calling for early snow. I requested a different route, but the dispatcher says it'll add too many miles, so I'll be back on Route 77 again. I keep telling myself it was nothing, just fatigue, bad weather, and an overactive imagination. But I've started checking my mirrors more often, and sometimes when the road gets dark and empty, I think I see those red lights glowing in the distance behind me. I can't help wondering if one day I'll break down on some lonely stretch of highway during a storm. And as I sit there waiting for help, will I see headlights approaching? Will someone knock on my window to check if I'm okay? And when they do, what will they see looking back at them? Story 17. I never thought I'd be sharing this, but maybe it'll help someone else stay safe out there on the lonely highways. I've been driving trucks for almost 20 years now, and what happened that rainy night in Utah still gives me nightmares. It was October 1998, Tuesday the 13th to be exact. Yeah, I know, should have been a warning sign right there. I was making my regular run from LA to Salt Lake City, hauling electronics. Been doing that route for 5 years by then, knew every stop, every bump in the road. I was 38, divorced for 3 years, living out of my red Kenworth that I'd named Betsy. That truck was more home to me than my empty apartment in Bakersfield. The rain had been coming down steady since Nevada, making visibility crap and slowing me down. I was running behind schedule, which always stressed me out. I prided myself on being punctual. By the time I hit southern Utah, it was close to midnight, and I was feeling the strain behind my eyes that told me I needed to stop. When I saw the sign for Cactus Creek Rest Area on Highway 91, I decided to pull in for a few hours of shut-eye. I'd stopped there dozens of times before, nothing special, just your basic rest stop with some bathrooms, vending machines, and a decent-sized lot for trucks. That night, there were only 2 other rigs there, parked at the far end. I remember thinking it was quieter than usual, but figured the weather was keeping folks moving or making them hole up at proper motels. I pulled into a spot near the entrance, habit from all my years on the road. Always park where you can pull out easy if needed. The rain was hammering on the roof of my cab, almost peaceful in a way. I radioed my location to dispatch, logged my hours, and planned to grab about 4 hours of sleep before pushing on to make my delivery time. After using the restroom, I climbed back into my cab, locked the doors, always lock your doors, fellow drivers, and settled into my bunk. I remember checking my watch. It was 12:42 a.m. I must have dozed off pretty quick, because the next thing I remember was jerking awake to a tapping sound. Not the rain. This was deliberate, a knuckle on glass. I'm a light sleeper on the road, survival instinct, I guess. The digital clock on my dash read 2:17 a.m. I sat up, disoriented for a second. The tapping came again, and I pulled back my privacy curtain to see a figure standing outside my driver's side door. The lot lights were casting just enough glow through the rain to make out a man in dark clothes, average height. Nothing remarkable, except for the fact that he was standing in a downpour at a rest stop in the middle of nowhere at 2 in the morning. My first thought was another driver needing help. Maybe their rig broke down or they needed to use a phone. This was before everyone had cell phones, remember? But something felt off. The way he was just standing there, not looking urgent or distressed, just waiting. I cracked my window about an inch, enough to hear, not enough for anyone to reach in. "Can I help you?" I called out. He leaned in slightly and I could see his face better now. Mid-40s maybe, clean-shaven, unremarkable features that I still see in my nightmares. He smiled, and something about that smile made the hair on my arms stand up. "Sorry to bother you," he said, his voice soft but clear over the rain. "My car broke down about a mile back. I was hoping you could give me a ride to the next town. The service station there knows me. I'm a local." He gestured vaguely down the highway. I'd been driving long enough to know the basic rule: never pick up strangers, especially at night. But there was something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. The way his eyes didn't match his friendly tone, maybe, or how he kept glancing at my truck's cab like he was assessing it. "There's a call box at the other end of the rest area," I told him. "Highway Patrol can send someone out." His smile didn't waver, but his eyes, they hardened somehow. "The box is broken. I already checked. Come on, it's pouring out here." He tested my door handle, subtly, but I noticed. It was locked, thank God. "I can radio for help," I offered, already reaching for my CB. "What's your name? I'll let them know where you are." He hesitated just for a fraction of a second. "Edward," he finally said. "Edward Crane." As I turned to grab my radio, I caught movement in my side mirror. A second figure was circling around the back of my truck. My heart started pounding. This wasn't right. I grabbed my radio and called out to any truckers in the area. No response. Then I tried to reach the emergency channel. As I was doing this, Edward kept talking, his voice turning insistent, urging me to just open the door, telling me I was being paranoid. The second figure had disappeared from my mirror view. I was scanning my surroundings frantically when I heard a metallic sound from underneath my truck, then a hissing noise. It hit me. They were tampering with my brake lines or fuel system. I had to get out of there now. I threw myself into the driver's seat, jammed the key in the ignition, and started Betsy up. Edward was still outside my door, but now he wasn't smiling. He slammed his palm against my window and shouted something I couldn't hear over the engine. I threw the truck into gear and hit the gas, harder than I should have. The truck lurched forward, and in my mirror, I saw the second figure rolling out from under my trailer, something metallic in his hand. As I pulled onto the highway, my heart racing, I glanced in my mirror one last time. Edward was standing in the lot, watching me go. He wasn't chasing, wasn't yelling, just watching. Somehow that was worse. I drove like hell for about 20 minutes, my hands shaking on the wheel, before I noticed the truck wasn't handling right. The steering felt sluggish, and there was a drag I couldn't explain. Something was definitely wrong with Betsy. I spotted a well-lit truck stop coming up and pulled in, parking under the brightest lights I could find. There were other trucks there, other people. I felt safer, but still couldn't stop shaking. I got out and checked under my rig with my flashlight. Sure enough, there was fluid leaking from a line they'd partially cut. Not enough to fail immediately, but enough that it would have eventually left me stranded on some deserted stretch of highway. I called the highway patrol from the truck stop and reported what happened. The officer who took my statement seemed concerned but not alarmed. Said they'd check out the rest area, but these things happen. People try to rob truckers. It's why we're told to keep our doors locked. He made it sound routine. I got Betsy patched up enough to make it to a proper garage in the morning. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, just sat in the brightly lit diner drinking coffee, jumping at every sound. The next day, I filed a more detailed report, then continued on to Salt Lake City. I told my dispatcher what happened, and he suggested I take a different route back. I agreed. 6 weeks later, I was at a truck stop in Nevada when I overheard some drivers talking about a female trucker who'd disappeared from a rest stop in Utah. My blood ran cold when they mentioned Cactus Creek. Her name was Darlene Wilcox, 42 years old, experienced driver, smart and cautious. They found her truck with the door open, her things inside, no signs of struggle, just gone. The security camera showed her talking to a man before walking away with him. I went to the police again, told them about my experience, connected it to Darlene's disappearance. They took me more seriously this time, but I could tell they thought I was just a rattled trucker spinning tales. They said they'd look into it, but I never heard back. For months after, I avoided southern Utah completely, changed my routes, took the long way around, lost money doing it, but I didn't care. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something terrible. In March 1999, I got a call from a detective in Utah. They'd found my wallet in a dry wash miles from Cactus Creek. My wallet, which I still had in my pocket. It made no sense until the detective explained. It wasn't my current wallet, but an old one I'd lost about a year earlier. Inside was my driver's license with my old address, some expired cards, and a few family photos. The detective asked if I knew Jordan Hayes or Miguel Sanchez. The names meant nothing to me. Then he asked about Franklin Weber. That name I recognized, a fellow driver who'd told a story at a truck stop about some weirdo trying to get into his rig at a rest area in Utah. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Weird encounters come with the job. It wasn't until January 2000 that I got the full story. A hiker found human remains in an old mine shaft. Thomas Malone, they said his name was. My name. But I was alive, talking to them on the phone. The detective explained, the man they called Edward Crane had been collecting truckers, 5 that they knew of. He had a list with our names, mine, Darlene's, the others. He'd crossed off 3 names, drivers who'd disappeared in 1997 and 1998. My name wasn't crossed off because he hadn't gotten me yet. They'd found photos of me in his house, photos of my truck, notes about my route schedule. He'd been watching me, planning, long before that rainy night. The wallet was part of his collection, something he'd stolen from my truck during a previous stop I hadn't even noticed. When they caught him in 2000, during a routine traffic stop of all things, they found his research. That's what he called it. He'd been a psychology professor once, before the university fired him for proposing experiments too disturbing to approve. So he'd decided to conduct his research without oversight. The mines were his laboratory, the cells where he kept people, watched them, documented how long it took to break them, the starvation, the isolation, the false hope he'd offer just to snatch it away. All meticulously recorded in academic language, like it was just data. I think about Thomas Malone sometimes, the real one, not me. They say Crane kept him alive for weeks. What was he thinking in those final days? Did he know help wasn't coming? Did he think about his family, his home, his truck? I still drive. Had to. It's my livelihood. But I never stop at rest areas at night anymore. Never pick up hitchhikers. Never trust a stranger with a broken-down car story. I keep a weapon in my cab now, legal in every state I drive through. Every October when the rain starts, I think about how close I came to being another name in Edward Crane's notebook. How the simple act of locking my door and trusting my instincts saved my life that night. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I hear tapping on my window, a knuckle on glass, a soft voice asking for help, and behind it something cold and calculating that sees me not as a person, but as a subject, a data point, an experiment waiting to happen. If you're on the road, especially at night, remember my story. Keep your doors locked, trust your gut, and if someone comes knocking at Cactus Creek Rest Area or anywhere else when you're all alone, just drive away. Whatever help they claim to need isn't worth your life. Story 18. I've never been one to believe in ghost stories. As a police officer in Pine Hollow for over 8 years, I've seen my share of weird stuff, but I've always been able to explain it rationally. That changed last Tuesday night, and I still can't make sense of what happened to me at the old Murdoch house. For those who don't know, Pine Hollow is a small town where everyone knows everyone's business. The Murdoch house has been abandoned for at least 15 years after old man Murdoch passed away in his sleep. At least that's the official story. There have always been rumors about that place. Weird noises, lights turning on and off, figures in the windows. Typical small-town ghost stories that I never paid attention to. It was around 11:30 at night when the call came in. I was finishing up some paperwork at the station, looking forward to going home, when dispatch radioed about suspicious activity at the Murdoch house. Someone had reported seeing lights inside. I figured it was probably just some teenagers looking for a spooky place to drink beer or whatever. The drive to Willow Lane only took about 7 minutes. It's on the edge of town where the forest starts to get thick. Even in my headlights, the Murdoch house looked off. It's a Victorian-style home, 2 stories with peeling paint and a wraparound porch. But what caught my attention immediately was the porch light. It was flickering on and off, which made no sense because the electricity had been disconnected years ago. I parked my cruiser and called in my location to dispatch. I remember the way my voice echoed in the quiet night. The neighbors' houses were dark. Most people in Pine Hollow go to bed early. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the house, listening for voices or any sign of trespassers. The floorboards of the porch creaked under my weight. The flickering light cast weird dancing shadows across the weathered wood. I knocked on the front door and announced myself. "Police officer? Anyone inside?" No response. I tried the doorknob, expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily in my hand. The door swung open with a long, drawn-out creak that sent a chill down my spine. Looking back, that should have been my first warning to get the hell out of there. The air inside was stale and smelled like dust and something else I couldn't quite place, maybe mildew or rot. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing an empty foyer with peeling wallpaper and a staircase leading to the second floor. I called out again, but the only response was my own voice bouncing back at me. That's when I heard it. A faint, scratchy sound coming from what I guessed was the living room. I followed the noise, my hand resting on my holstered gun. I wasn't expecting anything dangerous, but something about the house had me on edge. The living room was mostly empty, except for some broken furniture covered in dust sheets. And there, sitting on a wooden chair in the center of the room, was an old tape recorder. Not a modern one of those ancient cassette players from the 70s or 80s. It was playing, which made absolutely no sense. I approached it cautiously. The tape was running, but the sound was distorted and barely audible. I pressed stop, then rewind, and then play again. This time I could make out a voice, weak and desperate. "Help me! Help me!" My skin crawled. The voice sounded genuinely terrified. I reached for my radio to call this in, but all I got was static. I tried, again, adjusting the frequency, but nothing came through except harsh white noise that seemed to get louder the longer I held the radio. I decided to check the rest of the house and then get back to my car to call for backup. That's when I heard the creaking from upstairs, slow and rhythmic, like someone rocking in a chair. Except there shouldn't have been anyone up there. Common sense told me to leave and wait for backup, but I didn't. I've replayed this moment in my head 1,000 times since then, wishing I'd made a different choice. But I was a cop responding to a potential break-in. I had to check it out. The stairs protested under my weight as I made my way up. Each step seemed to amplify the creaking sound. My flashlight beam trembled slightly. I realized my hand was shaking. I'm not easily scared, but something about this place felt wrong on a fundamental level. The upstairs hallway had 4 doors, all closed except one that was slightly ajar. The creaking was coming from behind it. I pushed the door open slowly, my flashlight illuminating a nearly empty bedroom with faded floral wallpaper. In the corner was a wooden rocking chair, moving back and forth on its own. There was no breeze, no open window, nothing that could explain why this chair was rocking by itself. I stood frozen in the doorway, trying to process what I was seeing. Then, without warning, the door behind me slammed shut with such force that the whole room seemed to shake. I spun around and grabbed the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. It felt ice cold against my palm, so cold it almost burned. I pulled and twisted, but it was like the door had been sealed shut. That's when I noticed the temperature in the room had plummeted. I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. "Help me, help me." The same voice from the tape recorder downstairs was now surrounding me, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't coming through speakers. It was like the air itself was whispering, and it wasn't just one voice anymore. It sounded like multiple voices layered on top of each other, all pleading for help. I'm not ashamed to admit I panicked. I yelled for help, pounded on the door, and tried to radio again. Nothing but static, growing louder until it hurt my ears. I switched it off and turned back to face the room. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the corner where the rocking chair had been. The chair was still now, and behind it was what I can only describe as a shadow that was darker than the darkness around it. It had a vaguely human shape, but too tall and too thin, and it had eyes, not normal eyes, but pinpoints of pale blue light that seemed to bore right through me. I blinked, and it was gone. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder. It was ice cold and didn't feel quite solid, more like concentrated cold air in the shape of fingers. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, surrounding me on all sides. "Who's in the basement? Who's in the basement? Why won't you help us? Why won't you help us?" The voices became angry, accusatory. The rocking chair started moving again, faster and more violently, slamming against the wall. Pictures I hadn't noticed before began falling from the walls, glass shattering on the floor. The temperature dropped even further, and I felt like my lungs were freezing from the inside. I don't know where I found the strength, but something inside me snapped. Pure survival instinct took over. I threw myself against the door with everything I had. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th try, the wood splintered around the lock, and I fell through into the hallway. I didn't look back. I ran down those stairs faster than I've ever moved in my life. As I passed through the living room, the tape recorder was gone, completely vanished from the chair where I'd left it. The front door was wide open now, even though I distinctly remembered it, closing behind me when I entered. I burst out onto the porch and didn't stop running until I reached my cruiser. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I radioed for backup, and this time it worked perfectly. I reported a potential break-in and possible suspect in the house. I didn't mention anything else. Who would believe me? Backup arrived 12 minutes later, Officers Wilson and Rodriguez. We entered the house together and nothing. The house was completely empty. No tape recorder, no rocking chair moving on its own, no cold spots, no whispering. The upstairs bedroom door showed no sign of being broken, despite the fact that my shoulder was bruised from ramming into it. Wilson and Rodriguez clearly thought I was losing it. We searched the whole house, including the basement, which was just a concrete room with some old shelves. Nothing unusual. They kept giving me these sideways glances like they were worried about me. I've been on administrative leave since then. The official reason is stress-related health concerns, but I know the real reason. They think I had some kind of breakdown. Maybe I did, but that doesn't explain what I experienced. It's been 5 days, and I still can't sleep properly. Every time I close my eyes, I see that shadow figure with its glowing eyes. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling those cold fingers on my shoulder, and the whispers. I still hear them sometimes, just at the edge of my hearing, asking why I won't help them, asking who's in the basement. Last night I drove past the Murdoch house again. I don't know why, some compulsion I couldn't ignore. The porch light was flickering again, and in an upstairs window, the window of that bedroom, I swear I saw a figure watching me, just for a second, before it pulled back into the darkness. I've started researching the history of the house. There are gaps in the records, periods where no one seems to know who lived there. Old man Murdoch was a recluse who rarely left the property. The official cause of his death was heart failure, but the rumor around town is that his body wasn't found for weeks. Something happened in that house, something bad, and whatever it is, it's still there. waiting. I don't know if it's trying to warn me or threaten me. I don't know what it wants me to find in that basement. But I know one thing for certain. I'm never setting foot in the Murdoch house again. The thing is, I'm not sure it's going to give me a choice, because ever since that night, I can't shake the feeling that I didn't leave something behind in that house. Something followed me out.